Hello, good morning. We welcome you to the Conference on Gender Innovation. The conference is a pilot initiative for gendered and inclusive innovation and is held in the frame of Work Package 4, the Alliance as an Engine for Human Capital, of the research component of ERUA, the European Reformed University Alliance, founded by European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme. The aim of the conference is to bring together academia, communities, and social actors to present and discuss experiences and perspectives on gendered innovation initiatives and practices, provide with new opportunities, improve skills connected with innovation, and support diversity and inclusion. Gendered innovations means employing methods of gender analysis as a resource to create new knowledge and stimulate novel design, while it provides researchers and innovators with methodological tools of sex, gender, and intersectional analysis. As a few years ago, one of the major supporters of gender innovation, Londa Sipingen, underlined, the operative question is, does considering these factors add valuable dimensions to the research in the fields of science, health and medicine, engineering, and environment? Do they take research in new directions? Following this thread, the two-day conference focuses on the impact of gender on innovation and technology, discusses gender innovation across academia, the private sector, governmental bodies, and social actors, showcases specific case studies on how gender approaches lead to innovation, enables networking across academics, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and organizations. The abstracts we have received have been organized in 4 topics, which we hope they will raise questions and stimulate discussion, namely equality, vulnerability, sustainability, technology. On behalf of the scientific and organizing committee of the conference, I would like to thank all the presenters for their participation, our 2 keynote speakers, Professor Emerita Chryssidis-Tsillaki and Professor Lilian Mitru, and all of you who are attending the conference. We can start now with our first panel under the title Equality. Each of the speakers will have about 15 minutes at her disposal for his presentation, followed by explanatory questions. At the end of each panel, we can open up discussion for about 20 minutes. At this point, I would like to welcome Dionysios Gouvias, professor at the University of Aegean. Dear Professor Gouvias, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, dear colleague Tia, for the introduction. I'm glad to be among colleagues coming from this University Alliance, because I'm going to talk about an alliance, a network that has been set up here in Rhodes. So it's a local network, not an international. It is a kind of interinstitutional network, but it was set up here in Rhodes at the local level. And this is something that was, among other things, the initiative of the University of the Aegean. And I think you can see my presentation. I'll try to make it to enlarge. This is a presentation mode. I think you can see it all of you. If there's a problem, just let me know. Actually, I prepared for 20 minutes. I saw the program, it was 20 minutes and the discussion later on. So I must shorten my presentation. I will be brief on certain slides. So you'll excuse me. If you want further information, we can discuss it later on. I'm going to discuss about a network that has been set up regarding gender-based violence, but I start with the gender mainstreaming as the main definition given by the EGE, the European Institute for Gender Equality, or EGE if you prefer. We're talking about the gender perspective in every kind of preparation, design, implementation of public policies, monitoring, evaluation. And then a basic definition just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what is a gender-based violence, because we're going to discuss about this in a while when we talk about the network itself. We don't have time to comment on that. I'll just give you some brief idea of gender equality measures that have been taken, especially institutional measures, legislation concerning gender equality in a variety of issues: family law, work relations, equal pay, positive discrimination measures such as quotas in parliamentary, regional, and local elections, and so on and so forth. Special committees, agencies, or offices have been set up, have been institutionalized. And
apologies for the interruption, but we cannot see the slide changing. I don't know whether.
Let
Yes.
me try another.
Okay.
First, I will enlarge my presentation, and then I will share it with you.
Okay.
Maybe that way it will work. Give me a couple of seconds. Let's hope it will work. How about now? Does it change?
Absolutely fine. Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. I am part, and Professor Katsa as well, and Professor Pitsilakis as well. She used to be a member of the Gender Equality Commission, and she fought for it, actually. This is the latest legislation regarding the setting up of gender equality commissions, GECs, and gender equality plans that they are mandatory nowadays, especially when you seek for funding from the Horizon projects. Now it is mandatory for the 24 universities across Greece to have a gender equality committee, and one of the mandates, one of the provisions of the law makes it obligatory to have a gender equality plan. Now related to the GBV, according to that law, to the latest law of 2022, among the measures and among other things, the JEP recommends measures to promote equality, blah, 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 plus sexual harassment. I mean, measures against sexual harassment and harassing behaviors, provides information, training to members of the community, of course, the academic community, records reports of sexual harassment. This is not a disciplinary body, but it can refer cases to the competent bodies and committees and commissions, and provides assistance to the victims of GBV. We have been actually we set up the first equality committee back in 2014 by the decision taken by the rector of the University of the Aegean at that time, back in 2014, when it was not necessary, it was not obligatory to have gender equality committees. Nowadays, it is obligatory, as I told you, and each JEC consists of 9 members. You can see the composition of the body, of this collective body. And in the gender equality plan that we prepared for the time period 2022 to 2025, there are plans for, among other things, of course, to implement sensitization programs, primarily addressed to the university community, but also to wider audiences such as local authorities, civil servants, in general, teachers, and of course to promote measures to prevent GBV, sexual harassment in the workplace, for example. But these activities include not only the university community, the academic community, if you like, but the local communities as well. This is something important because after a long-term cooperation between our university and our committee with the municipality of Rhodes, you can see some occasions when we usually cooperated and we co-organized some events back from 2014 and to the present and the present day. There have been some informal talks from late 2020 during the pandemic, and some telemeetings, and we decided to coordinate our actions. You can see the actors involved in this network. The finalization was made in the end of summer 2021, and the protocol was signed by those signatories, the municipality of Rhodes, which administers, for example, counseling centers for GBV victims and shelter for GBV victims. The South Aegean region, which mediates for the dispersal of funds, state and European funds, to those counseling centers. The University of the Aegean, of course, represented by me, but the protocol was signed by PC Vitsilakis, Professor Vitsilakis, General Hospital of Rhodes. I forgot to tell you that the protocol was signed on the 24th of September 2021, and it was valid until the end of 2023. We're going to comment in a while about that. The General Hospital of Rhodes, as an institution, offers aid to the victims of GBV, the directorates of primary and secondary education, because of their commitment through socialization given at schools for the fight against GBV, the Bar Association, which represents active lawyers engaged in GBV cases, the Dodekanis Developmental SA, which is a company that promotes GM measures in developmental projects in the South Aegean region, and the Philotimos Foundation, which has a mandate to empower vulnerable groups, especially young and handicapped women. And we have also two affiliated members, the local police division and the public prosecutor's office. They did not sign the protocol, but they committed themselves to help setting up the network and help us and assist us in whatever we're doing. This is a graphical representation of the signatories. Going further down now, don't want to tire you with details on that. Yep, and we were committed to design and promote policies at the prevention level, first of all, and at the intervention level, secondly. This is an action research, actually. This is mostly my reflection of the net as a network participant. And I'm trying to highlight possible weaknesses and barriers, as well as challenges and prospects for such networking, because it is an interesting, in a way, it is a pioneering attempt to bring different actors regarding GBV and how an academic institution is involved in this. So I'm based, but this is a very grounded theory, let's say. I'm based on policy network theory, but I go further, and I don't have either the time or the means to elaborate and extensively examine lots of data in qualitative or quantitative, of quantitative nature or qualitative nature, because this is not the main focus. Actually, it's been only 3 years. And but the policy network is a basic theoretical perspective through which I can see the setting up of this framework, of this network, excuse me, as a non-hierarchical, interdependent nature which connects diverse actors who share common interests in relation to a particular policy. For example, policies against GBV. Exchange resources, cooperate, and they wish to achieve common goals. Excuse me. This is a definition given by Bersel, a Swiss academic, about policy networks. She's an expert in European Union policy. So I can see policy network not as a mega theory, okay? I see policy networks as a model, as an analytical tool, if you like, to analyze how these non-hierarchical form of interactions occur among and between public and private sectors in policy making. I distinguish government, which is carried out through formal hierarchies, with governance. So here we're talking about governance, which is accomplished through the informal authority of diverse, flexible, and non-hierarchical networks. So I'm trying to give some SWOT analysis, but this is a very, very draft analysis, very hybrid, if you like, analysis, because we don't have so much data. I intend to extend my research later on, and hopefully, if the network survives, if it is reactivated again, which is highly unlikely, but we strive for that. I mean, we're in the middle of renewing it and reactivate the network. I was based on minutes of the network's meetings, on my own field notes, the exchange of emails, and I took material from 2 public events organized in September and November 2022. The network, just to give a brief description of what has happened the last 3 years, remained at the prevention level, especially regarding initiatives of raising awareness, public campaigns, for example. In the middle of September 2022, there was a one-day conference devoted to GBV, with speeches from experts, art exhibitions, artworks from school children, video projections, distribution of leaflets, and so on and so forth. And on the 30th, excuse me, of November 2022, there was a scientific evening, as we label it, on GBV in Rhodes, with presentations from various field experts, such as lawyers, psychologists, social workers of the municipality of Rhodes, that is, police officers on ways to combat GBV. The organizational workload, so I'm describing the way the network has worked so far, fell on the Directorate of Social Policy of the municipality of Rhodes. And more specifically on the head of that directorate, who is a sociologist by training. There was no financial, although we committed at the beginning, no financial, institutional, or technical support was given by any other partner. The only partners who got deeply involved was mainly the municipality of Rhodes, this directorate I told you about, our committee, and the Bar Association in a while, not so much, but it provided, for example, hosting of events and some other technical assistance. The exchange of ideas about the various events was made mainly between the four partners. Myself, as a representative of the university, the municipality of Rhodes, the Bar Association, and sometimes the Decanis Developmental SA. The affiliated members, that is the police and the public prosecutor's office, remained rather distant to attempt to organize common actions, share information, and exchange good practices. The vast majority of emails were sent away from the municipality of Rhodes, the directorate, social policy, with very few coming from either from us or the Decanis Developmental SA. The exchange of messages concerned mainly replies to invitations, kind replies. I give an example of how many times I tried to reactivate the network after it expired, after the protocol expired in the end of 2023. And this is an issue that we have to take into account when we discuss about a nine-member network with some affiliated members. That even to the email itself, to the emails themselves, there were very few replies received, even by only acknowledging the reception of the messages, and most of them after follow-up phone calls by the center. So this is the main activities and the main interactions and the intensity of the network. We can see the central node here, the municipality of Rhodes. We can see the either thicker and thinner lines, two-way or one-way arrows, one-way arrows, excuse me, two-way arrows. The two-way arrows, the thicker ones represent more intense and more meaningful interactions between our committee and the municipality, some interactions with the Bar Association of Rhodes, the South Aegean region, a lot thinner, as you can see, and the other, actually, they're not interactions, they're just informational notes sent by the municipality of Rhodes to those actors. How much time do I have, Professor Kansa?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, thank you very much. I think I will be just in time. So this is a very brief, SWOT analysis of our network. We can see that it is a very innovative network with a lot of experts on the field experts, people with status, for example, the public prosecutor here in Rhodes. There is a multiplicity of richness and of perspectives. And this is something originally positive. And vital information that can be shared among us, for example, statistics by the counseling center of Rhodes or the local police division regarding GBV. But on the other hand, we have some weaknesses. For example, the loose relations between the various personalities involved, the lack of commitment sometimes of some actors. I gave you some examples. The poor coordination, which is a basic problem actually of my country in general and the state institutions in general, and CEDAW committee or the Council of Europe regarding the Istanbul Convention stated this very clearly, that Greece suffers from poor coordination of authorities, state and non-state authorities. There is a reservedness, of course, from affiliated members, and there's a lot of workload on certain actors. For example, that lady I mentioned before, working in the municipality of Rhodes. There are opportunities for cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary cooperation because we have people from different backgrounds. But there are threats, as you can see. And most of all, I think that the lack of political will is the most important of that. The increasing workload on key nodes of the network, the understaffing, and sometimes the transfer of key persons to other posts. And I have just two slides. One is general outline of the nature of our network. It seems not to be able to be based on stable relationships, as Virgil commented and proposed. It is clearly non-hierarchical, but that might be its problem when judged for its efficiency and effectiveness. It connects diverse actors who do not necessarily share common interests. That's the main problem in relation to a particular policy, GPV policy, or gender mainstreaming in general, if you like. Has not made it to promote exchange of resources. This is a very, very negative thing in our relationships. It proved that cooperation is the best way to achieve common goals. However, it proved that, for example, the campaigns for raising public awareness, when it happened just twice, it was very effective and widely publicized. Also being informal, diverse, flexible, and non-hierarchical, it is deeply influenced by formal hierarchies. For example, the relation we have with the public prosecutor's office. And finishing, some comments on the way regarding the way the University of the Aegean is involved in this network. That our contribution was crucial at the initial stages, but withered away as time went by. The position within the network needs to be taken into account when we set up this kind of networks, because there are nodes with different potentials of controlling and monitoring things. Personality traits play a very important role. That is something that has to be taken into account when the University of the Aegean is involved in suggesting representatives for the network. And the only thing that we made it rather successfully in the past, not only regarding the network, is the sensitization programs, seminars, for example, addressed to wider audiences. And this is something within the reach of the GEC, of our GEC, Gender Equality Committee. The network also reveals significant aspects of the University of the Aegean status in local communities. And it says a lot about the status it enjoys in the local communities. And this is something I would like to comment later on. And networking initiatives must be taken centrally by the University of the Aegean authorities in order to consolidate the network. It does not have to do only with a person's commitment. Centrally, the University of the Aegean must support this kind of networking because it implements in a way its main principles, among other things, to combat gender-based violence and promote gender mainstreaming in general. Thank you very much for your time.
We thank you for this really rich and thought-provoking presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for explanatory questions, but we can return back at the end of this panel. Now I would like to move to the presentation of Marta Murska from Nicholas Romeris University. Welcome.
One moment, I will share my presentation. Is my presentation visible to you?
Unfortunately not.
One moment.
It shows as a whiteboard. Is it a PowerPoint presentation?
Yep. Yep. I think it will work.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, great.
Right. Good morning, dear participants, dear guest speakers, honored professors, and all the participants. So I would like to share my thoughts on the theme, the path to gender equality, Ukrainian and global experience. Let me talk through the key arguments and evidence that support my position on gender equality. One of the core messages I delivered is that gender equality cannot be achieved through legislation alone. While laws plays an essential role, the path to gender equality requires a comprehensive social political strategy. Societal attitudes, education, and cultural reforms must align with the legal measures to bring about true change. Consider the examples of Sweden, where the introduction of gender quotas in political and corporate sphere has successfully increased women's representation in parliament from 33% to 47%. However, these legal measures were only successful because they were part of broader cultural shift that embraced gender diversity. Similarly, Ireland's parental leave politics reshaped societal attitudes toward gender roles, both at home and in workspace. Ukraine too has made significant legal process, but laws without accompanying societal shifts can only go so far. The legal framework I outlined in the presentation from 2010 amendments to the law on equal rights and opportunities for women and men to the 227 National Action Plan shows that Ukraine is moving in the right direction. However, for these legal changes to have a lasting impact, Ukraine must foster societal and cultural buy-in. This is why I emphasize on a holistic strategy that includes legal, societal, and educational elements. My presentation highlights the commendable steps Ukraine has already taken in its journey towards gender equality. Since 2010, several critical laws have been enacted, including amendments to the law on equal rights and opportunities for women and men, the law on prevention and combating domestic violence, the ratification of Istanbul Convention, the law on ensuring equal pay for equal work, and the introduction of the new national action for gender equality. These legislative measures have created a strong foundation for advancing gender equality in Ukraine. However, as I argue in the presentation, laws are only effective when combined with societal change. To further strengthen Ukrainian impact, I drew on the experience of two leading nations in gender equality, Sweden and Iceland. These countries offer powerful lessons that can guide the strategies. Sweden's decision to implement gender quotas in politics and the corporate world resulted in a significant increase in women's representation in both spheres. Ireland's introduction of progressive parental leave policies, including paternity leave up to 3 months, reshaped gender roles and contributed to workspace equality. This initiative not only supports families, but also promotes a balanced gender dynamic in the workforce. By adapting these strategies to Ukraine's unique context, Ukraine can accelerate very huge progress toward gender equality. One of the most compelling reasons to pursue gender equality is its economic benefits. As I referenced in my presentation, McKinsey's Global Institute found that closing the gender gap could add 12 trillion to global GDP by 2025. This is not just an argument based on fairness or justice, it is a practical economy strategy. For Ukraine, which is working toward economic recovery and development, promoting gender equality could unlock significant growth potential by fully integrating women into the workforce and ensuring equal pay and opportunities. Ukraine can increase its economic productivity, innovations, resilience. Also, I think that gender equality is not just a social issue, it is a key to sustainable economic development. True gender equality requires a holistic strategy that addresses legal, societal, and educational dimensions. Without tackling deep-rooted cultural norms and stereotypes, legal reforms alone will not achieve their full impact. Educational initiatives, cultural initiatives should aim to shift societal attitudes toward gender roles, making it clear that gender equality benefits everyone, men and women. Some may argue that Ukraine has more immediate challenge to address and that gender equality is a secondary issue. Gender equality is central to the country's development and future prosperity. A society that includes half of its population from equal participation cannot reach its full potential. In fact, by advancing gender equality, Ukraine will strengthen its social fabric and create more robust, competitive economy. Cultural and societal support is critical to ensuring that legal reforms and informs Sweden and Ireland succeeded because they complemented their legal reforms with a commitment to changing societal norms. Ukraine must do the same. In conclusion, I would like to say that gender equality is not only achievable, it is necessary for Ukraine's social and economic development. And by adopting a holistic strategy, learning from global best practices and fostering societal change alongside legal reforms, Ukraine can become a leader in gender equality. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for this interesting presentation, and I think that is very well connected with the previous one from Dionysios Okouvlias, underlying the significance of the social and cultural context. It's not only about policies and politics, but it's also about the culture, it's about education, it's about everyday practices. Since we have still a couple of minutes, I would like to ask you, could you please tell us a bit more about this new national plan in 2023? So if you know which is the main, the aim and the scope and on which draws it on which other plans, etc. If it's possible to tell us a bit more about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
The main reason, the aim is to help women and men equally work, empowered like economical resilience in the times of war. Also, it includes some chapters on domestic violence because it is really a very huge problem. Also, it emphasized on the most emphasis on women rights in work, women rights in universities, in educational sphere, in economical sphere. So I think that it would be very effective to combine all these spheres on gender equality, to take the experience of main global countries that already have implemented this like rules. So yeah, I think that Ukraine should learn, and I hope it will be.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions, probably, for Marta? Okay, we can return at the end of the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we can move to our third presentation. Marta, could you please?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Yes. Isabella Crespri from University of Macerata with Marta Scocco also from University of Macerata. Isabella, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Now I'm going to share my presentation and yes, okay, here it is. Okay, now I put in the presentation mode, it should work. Okay, so thank you for the introduction and thank you for this invitation in this session about equality. What I'm going to show you is the first results from this progendering project, that is an Erasmus project that is focused on the analysis of GEPs, so the gender equality plans, and in particular I would like to share with you today some of the results regarding in particular the first actions of this project. So the project is a project financed by the European Union. Here you can see the partners. There are 6 partners in the team project, and this project aims at promoting gender equality, inclusion, diversity, and respect in the academia, and in particular provision of know-how to implement GEPs and educating university students on the topic of GEPs and our key objectives. So one of the main points that I consider as an innovation in this project is the fact that we will focus in particularly from the next year and that's the second and third year of the project on students and on their awareness of gender equality in the university, so at the academia level. So I would like to show you results in particular about Italy, the country where is my university, where we are working now with the team, and to give you some overview. So first, in Italy, many universities have adopted the gender equality policies under the aegis of chancellor, rectors, or ad hoc delegates with an interest in gender issue. And this was already done since, I would say, the 2011 in Italy, under a special directive issued by the Presidency of Council of Ministers and through the Single Guarantee Committee. So in Italy, we'd start many years ago to introduce equality into the university. But for sure, we know that the introduction of GEPs and the gender budgeting were strongly forced and committed all the university due to the Horizon, for example, 2020, but also with the new national strategy for gender equality in Italy, that was inspired by the gender equality strategy at the UN level and also at the international level to introduce the JEP in all the universities. So we started decades ago with some measures, but now obviously this process is going to be quite, I would say, very, very spread across all the universities. So in our research design, we obviously this is a representative, sorry, not a representative design, but we focused on the qualitative aspects, on the analysis of some JEPs, and then we also make this quantitative online survey with different scope. So the first part was the gender equality plans analysis. We analyzed 4 JEPs. We decided to choose a different level of university number of students, for example, so the dimension of university, the regional aspect. So we focus only on these 4 JEPs in the beginning, and we also interviewed the people that were involved in the preparation of these 4 JEPs. In the second part, we use this quantitative survey, and we collected the almost 560 number of responses, including students. So this was the process that we were doing in our research. The same are doing the other partner from the project. So I just want to show you briefly which are the main innovations that at least we found in the analysis of these JEPs. And we checked for innovations across 5 areas that you can see in this slide. They are in the vertical version in pink. So work-life balance, balance in leadership, equality in recruitment, gender mainstreaming in research and curricula, and prevention of gender-based violence and sexual harassment, because these 5 areas are the areas that are suggested, but I would say also in a way very important to check if the gender equality plans tends to answer to all the questions regarding gender equality in the academia. So in the first area, for example, work-life balance, we found a lot of innovation in promotion of inclusive languages, for example, development of child-friendly spaces, support for men's parental leave through training or legal provisions for fathers, measured to aid reintegration after parental leave. Obviously, we always need to keep in mind that we are in Italy, in the Italian context, and in different countries, this could be different as considered as an innovation. So we were also looking at this, I would say, national cultural differences in the project. This is the situation in Italy. So what is an innovation? Maybe in Italy, somewhere else could be something that is already implemented since here. It depends. But this is interesting to look at this in the European context and to see different perspectives. In the area of balance, leadership, and decision-making, we check for these innovations that are already there. So provision of benefit to the departments that promote women's career advancement, for example, the implementation of gender quotas in leadership roles and committees, and the organization of workshops and seminars on inclusive decision-making and women's empowerment. If we look at equality in recruitment and career progression innovation, we can look at these mentorship programs and seminars in secondary schools to combat gender stereotypes in scientific research. So we also check that in university when we are doing, for example, training or orientation, some initiative in the secondary schools is also useful to introduce this idea of gender equality. Training initiatives focused on raising awareness of unconscious bias in recruitment and career progression evaluation. Regarding gender mainstreaming in research and curricula, so this is very strongly related to university and academia, we found that training on integrating gender into research, teaching, and work activities for PhD students, research and administrative and technical staff are very useful. And when they are proposed, they are also attended by a lot of people. And then some universities also introduce awards for PhD students and master thesis in gender studies. And one university also create podcasts on feminism, gender equality, and some other issue. The last area regarding gender-based violence show a very strong importance given to the establishment of anti-violence center as a safe space for inclusive discussion. If we look at some limitation, the main problem is very often students and researchers, especially in the beginning of the career, often receive inadequate consideration regarding work-life balance and organizational structure initiatives. So very often these measures are only for, I would say, structured personnel, excluding, for example, students. But sometimes students also have family or have childcare responsibility. And there is also an absence of analysis regarding barriers to women's representation in leadership and decision-making. So very often there are no data regarding this. And some activities regarding gender-based violence, for example, are exclusively directed at students, lacking information about investigative process and disciplinary procedures, but not often available for other components of the university personnel. There are also strengths and weaknesses that emerge from the key informants interview. So, for example, among the strengths, the formal recognition of JEP working group was very important, give formal priority to some actions, and also training course on mediation and conflict, addressing gender issues were very important. Also the implementation of anti-discriminatory measures and the establishment of gender budget. Very often the problem was the lack of money, lack of resources, but the establishment of a gender budget was for sure something very important. I go quickly to the weakness. Sees limited availability of work-life balance resources. So there are measures, but there is no money to support this kind of measures sometimes. The insufficient budget allocation for monitoring and implementing, and also a limited regulatory authority of JEPs. So very often there are discrimination and some aspects that arise, but it's very difficult to intervene directly on this situation because of a lack of legal aspect and actions. So in the second part, I would like to quickly show you some results from the online survey. Here are the data, but just to say that we involve both academic, administrative students, and there were 3 sections, one on gender equality plans, and then social demographic information. So what about gender equality? So this survey show what maybe we all expect about the importance of gender equality in contemporary society. So do you see an improvement in gender equality was the question in your country over time? And most of the people, full sample, say yes, but 36% say no, so this is important. What is interesting is the percentage of students that are more negative. So they think, yes, there was an improvement, but maybe not so much. So they feel like if they live in a society that, yes, maybe improve gender equality, but really not enough. Okay. Considering the main reason for this, for example, just focusing here on student because was one of our interesting point of view perspectives, thinking about the list of reasons, there was a list of reasons why women can be considered equal to men in your country. One of the most important was related to unpaid care, housework and parenting duty are not equally shared. So basically the work-life balance issue. And second, because boys and girls are treated differently when growing up in the family. So education and socialization on one side and work-life balance issue. If we look at how much they consider gender equality important, again, we have something maybe we expect, we are happy about that in Italy, that is very important, and a bit more even for student group, for example, in this case. If we look at gender equality in high education institution like university in this case, how important do you think is promoting gender equality at university? And again, many students, 87%, say this is very, very important. Okay, so they are aware that this is important. But if we look at which measures are more relevant for this equality to be introduced in university, we see that awareness-raising measures and measures combating sexual harassment are the most useful from the point of view of respondents, that for sure are more related to practical and everyday life aspects, more than introducing a budget and so on. So there is a kind of difference between what the referent of the JEPs consider very important from the organizational point of view, and what is more important from the people involved in the survey. So this is interesting. I think there is no a contradiction, but simply different point of view. But this is again results which we obviously use to promote and to implement next step. Another question was about the knowledge and about the gender equality plan. So first, how much do you know about JEP in your university? And if we look here, we have a very, very, what I say, very, very negative answer, because most of the people, in particular students, don't know anything about this JEP. So they do not know it exists, it is important or whatever. So this is a point that we need to focus about students. And again, they don't know it exists and they never read it. So this is another important aspect, because I mean, there are a lot of measures, there are a lot of effort to introduce JEP, but from the side of students, it seems to be not very effective. The main reason about that is, from the point of view of the student, they hadn't received communication about its publication. Okay, we check, obviously, with the referent, and they say, oh, but we sent a lot of emails, we sent emails to all students, we promote, we put on the Facebook page of the university and things like that. But maybe this is not I would say, the most efficient way to promote JEP among the university. So I think this lack of the communication and dissemination in a way that remain very, very formal is something to work on for the future. Otherwise, it's something that stay there somewhere in the office, in the website, but very few implementation and opportunity to be, I would say, understand by students in particular. So some recommendation from these first results would be to incorporate an intersectional approach into the plan, address the unique needs of marginalized gender identity within the academic community. For example, we found many students asked to include, for example, women, men, but also LGBT plus, for example, that is somewhere hidden in the lines, hidden in some paragraph in the gender equality plans. Expand the ongoing training initiative, targeting faculty, administrative, and students in subsequent plan iteration. But important is to find a way that make this initiative very effective. Secure adequate funding and human resources for JEP implementation. With no funds, with no human resources, JEP remains dead texts in a way, because they are not really easy to implement. The last 2 points, establishing complaint mechanism for addressing cases of violence and discrimination, aiming to address power imbalances, alleviate survivor distress, and simplify procedures. And last, include students' representation and voices in the evaluation of plans. So to get information about what we found to be some negative aspects, like the lack of information, lack of communication, or in a way, these were not so effective in the results. Thank you so much for time, and I think I'm more or less on time. Thank you.
Isabella, thank you very much for this thorough presentation, and I think that it's very useful for all of us working with gender equality plans. Really interesting. We have a couple of minutes, so I have a question. You've mentioned that I think it's really important, the national perspective. Because in their majority, these gender equality plans are very much related to the European Commission. So there are some points that they have to focus on. On the other hand, countries differ so much from each other. So I would like to ask you, because this is a project established in 5 countries, if I remember correctly.
Six including Italy.
Yes. Which were the main differences?
Okay, so
we are implementation of JEPs in these countries.
Yes. Okay. So, for example, in some countries, the work-life balance measures are very well implemented. They have a lot of resources, so this is not a problem anyway. It works and is already fine. It includes men, fathers, and things like that, for example. While in Italy, for example, and in other, is still on the way in the university. Yes, we have compulsory maternity leave, for example, that is always there, but it's very difficult to consider in academia that even men take this leave. And this is a national cultural aspect, not only at the university. So it is the same like in other countries. For example, it's quite difficult to speak about gender violence in university. So it's like a kind of argument you don't talk about. So to introduce measure to stress this aspect is very often a bit hidden, and they prefer maybe not to do too much on that, because, you know, in the academia and the hierarchical aspect, this could also in a way slow the JEP process. So it's very difficult to find balance, and the language, for example, the use of inclusive languages in some countries is okay. So you can use the female, male, or as you prefer, a different way of introducing the different language inclusive aspect. In some other, this is not the case. So they just use the male grammar reference, and that's all at the moment. So yes, so these are, even if every country is trying to do as much as possible and to improve, there are, I would say, different level of implementation in different areas. Maybe in the future we will diminish these differences. Let's try to do that.
Okay, thank you. And the clarifying question, in the quantitative research, how many women, how many men? Because I think there's a difference, a huge difference in numbers, right?
Yes, more women than men. And
yes,
this
why so?
Yeah, and this is, I think this is, we spread all to humanistic, but also to STEM university. So not only, very often, like in other researches in Italy, at least, women are more involved in giving their opinion about this issue.
Okay.
So it's when we speak about gender issue, gender equality, in many researches and studies, women tends to answer much more than men, even if we send to a sample that was half and half. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you, Isabella, for your very interesting presentation. We share common things and common problems. I don't want to comment on that right now. I just want to ask 3 questions, actually 2 coupled questions, 2 together and 1 separate one. The first one is, maybe I didn't notice, it's my problem, my mistake. Was it a survey addressed to students at your university or to a wider sample of university students? And secondly, was it part of the preparation for the gender equality plans, or it just a separate research within the context of the RIERUA? The third one, I will ask it when you reply to the first 2 ones.
Okay, very quickly. The survey was national, so not only my university and not only to students. Okay, so all...
I noticed that, yeah.
Okay.
Regarding students, it was students from all over the universities, right? Okay.
Yes. And no, this was part of the project. So the JEP were already implemented, were already done in all the universities and all the partners, Italy included. So this is a second step after the implementation of JEP some years. We are now going to check how it's going on. Okay, so
right.
Okay,
right.
Not in the preparation.
Yeah, right. So the third one and the last one, sorry if I tired you. You mentioned that because we're facing the same problems, that there is a communication, a problem in dissemination of information regarding the JEP. Most of the students didn't know anything about that. We're facing the same problems, and not just my university, all the universities. So how do you plan, or what did you suggest in your JEP in order to overcome this obstacle?
Okay, this was the next year task for the project, but just some idea. First, we decided to include in our project at the local level the students' representatives. I don't know, maybe all the university have this. And a second step will be to introduce some labs on gender equality plan reserved for students, but as, how can I say, teaching activities, so in Italy with credits, I think it's the same all over the university, so that this also maybe support students to participate a bit more. And we also decide to create some kind of gender equality plan day or initiative or things like that, trying to involve much more students with practical activities, seminars, discussion groups, things like that. Very practical. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we can continue. Thank you, Isabella. Thanks. We can continue with the presentation of Yasa Gomez Llanes from the University of Las Palmas, Canarias.
I am Yaiza Gomez Llanes from the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. I would like to thank the organization and also the participants for their interventions. My participation is about my university's experience with the quality plan. My colleague Miriam Martín Paciente also participated in this work. The JIP of the University of Las Palmas in Gran Canaria is in force since 27 July 2022. The JIP is structured in 6 axes and 49 measures. The deadline for the implementation of the action depends on each of the objectives and measures. Some deadlines are set for the first 2 years and others for the entire duration of the plan. The reason for this difference and for the fact that some deadlines are so long is because in some cases we considered that due to the importance and type of the action, it was convenient for entire duration of the plan. In this implementation period, the proposed objectives have been met and the planned dates have generally been met. We have carried out several actions. Some examples are these. For the first axis, promotion of a culture of equality, disseminate the University Equality Plan, make the Equality Plan visible among the university community, promote and support the initiatives presented for the guarantee of the title of honorary doctorate, and other mention or recognition of the ULPGT to academic women for their professional career. Other axes are work-life balance and organizational culture. The actions are develop training activities in order to promote co-responsibility. Other axes are gender equality in recruitment and career progression, or gender balance in leadership and decision-making. Other axes are integration of the gender dimension into research and teaching content. In this axis are a lot of activities, for example, of the training courses of the incorporation of the gender perspective in teaching. The last axis are measures against gender-based violence. For this axis are activities like analysis the application of the protocol regarding sexual and gender-based harassment. At the first period of the JIP implementation, we have key lessons learned. For example, flexible deadlines are essential for measures and actions where there are several responsibility bodies. The overload of work and the lack of specific personal and finance resources in the responsibility bodies make it difficult to comply with the measures and require specific support for this. It is therefore essential for the Athena team and its technical staff to actively collaborate in order to promote compliance with the measures and actions. It is important to emphasize the control and coordination of the monitoring and compliance when several bodies departments are responsible. It is necessary to insist on the importance of compliance with the JIP and to raise awareness that is not only a legal obligation but a benefit for the entire university community. Thank you for your attention. I am Yaiza Gomez-Janet from the University.
Okay, thank you. I don't know whether guys is with us right now. She's not with us. Okay. So in this case, because there were some problems with her connection, and this is the reason why she has recorded her presentation and she shared it with us. Unfortunately, we would not have the opportunity to discuss her presentation with her, but we can move on the discussion and open the floor for comments and questions for all the participants. I would like to ask the participants to open their cameras and be with us for discussion. Dionysis, Marta, Isabella? Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I would like to note that you can participate as attendees either by asking a question or by raising your hand, and then you can have access to a camera and voice. So please do. Okay, before I open the floor, just one comment. I found all the four presentations very well connected to each other. And to my opinion, they raise a number of important issues related to the significance of the context and also of education. Focusing on the specificities of the national context in relation to European one, stressing the need for budget, and also posing the question still how we can engage men and how can we implement these policies. And also another question, very important, I think, is also how to engage people from STEM. So not only from humanities and social science, and here I'm speaking from our own experience from the University of the Aegean, but also to engage people from other disciplines, from other science. I do not. I would like to ask the presenters whether they would like to comment on these issues. Otherwise, we can move on with other questions and comments. Would you like to add something or... See, yes, please, because I saw that you opened your microphone. No connection?
You make sorry?
Okay, yes, now
no connection?
Because you were frozen for a minute. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Frozen
I was
in
just going to say that...
Sorry about that.
What?
Frozen in roads. That's hilarious. Sorry.
Well, although I'm in Athens. So
Even in Athens.
what I wanted to ask all of our speakers was sort of in making a pass toward the few things that I have to say afterwards. Apart from all of, I heard only a few examples of broader projects or broader intentions for educating, re-educating, sensitizing our academic communities and the broader communities about the gender inequalities that still exist, in a discussion about the new sexualities and the new gender identities that we have. I did hear in Italy a reference, and thank you for that. But the question is a little bit purposeful, exactly, because I want to give you another example of emphasis at a different period of time that makes all of these projects that we do projects at a certain place and time that emphasize what is financed and forgets many of the essential, or leave behind many of the essential issues that still persist in gender identity and in forms of gender inequality that we have in our society. That was addressed to the...
sorry. Thank you, Chrissy, so much. Does anyone want to respond?
If you don't, I can give you a little bit more of a problematic, but I see that Isabella.
Isabella, yes. Please, Isabella.
Yes, thank you, Isabella.
Yes.
It sounded like your program had more of that.
Thank you for these comments, question. Well, so we understood the problem when we start looking at the Horizon guidelines for gender equality plans. Because if you look at that guidelines, there is very few information or I would say ideas about going beyond men and women. So very often it's targeted to men and women as these two categories. So we start from that because these are the guidelines, considering that not all the countries are so available to introduce directly men, women, and something else. Okay, so this is very, very tricky issue because when you need to submit a questionnaire, if in a country they do not accept some language definition is very difficult. So we're trying to find a compromise, but we decided at least with some of the partners that were available to that to include also this issue in the project. And also from the students' perspective, we get a lot of comments in one open question where they ask, please also include different categories. But then it becomes very difficult because many data, at least in Italy, are basically, I would say, collected with men, women. We really have no options sometimes to have information, even if because people very often do not want to identify differently or do not want to give, you know, it's a question between the personal identity and also the political issue. So we ask in the questionnaire, for example, how many people to ask you, do you think you are women, men, she's women, she's all categories, a bit, or other. But we have very few answers in this category. So we did, why? It was anonymous. It was so I don't know. It's a big question, but always we want to keep an eye on that in the project. That's what I can say.
Well, clearly,
please.
Gender identities and their multiplicities vary very much from country, depending on the culture and so on and so forth, and their own conditions. Thank you very much, Isabella.
Thank you. Another question or comment, probably? You can give 1 or 2 minutes. Following Chrissy's question, comment, and that will be a question to all three of you, is the gap probably. From one hand, we have all these gender equality policies and gender equality plans in the university. And on the other hand, we see that in many European societies, gender is not considered an issue anymore. And also Judith Butler has published very recently a new book called Who is Afraid of Gender? And on the other hand, as Chrissy has just mentioned, there is a younger generation. For them, men and women probably do not have a meaning at all because the issue and the problem lies somewhere else. So how could we bring all these things together in the environment of the university, in the context of the university, where we have all these policies and politics? The universities are still institutions. And on the other hand, we are engaged with young generations, and we have to, to consider all these issues. And to which extent, to make it more clear, my question, to which extent the gender equality plans could consider these issues and these topics? Because the gender equality plans are very specific. It's about work balance, it's about equality in workplace, it's about balance between work and family. But probably there are more issues. So how can we target them? If there are any thoughts, or I don't know. Dinis, please.
Well, there are open issues in every for every aspect of the academic life. As you mentioned, and Isabella mentioned, and all of us have witnessed in the last few years, we've been trying to build up a new framework that promotes gender equality. And there is legislation in place regarding family, work relations, a position in power positions and all, equal pay, positive discrimination measures, new categories for categorization or new variables, let's say, sometimes in dealing with identities and all this stuff. It is not an easy issue, actually. I'm not going to discuss, I have some reservations about the development, the creation of new categories in public documents, but I'm not going to discuss this now. We need to have more elaborate theoretical as well as practical and legal framework in order to pinpoint and clearly demarcate certain issues, because, for example, gender identities sometimes have to do also with social obligations and social relations between us, between the society, let's say, I mean, and the state, and there are obligations, and there's also legislation regarding duties and liberties and public values that we should take into account when we promote gender-related policies of gender equality in general. I'm talking about not only men and women, male, female, but all the femininities and masculinities and all the in-between space. But regarding the role of gender equality committees and the GEPs that we're building up now, and we try to implement actually all the aims that we committed ourselves to implement. It's very difficult, especially in times of economic austerity, in times of insecurity, in times of rising of, let's say, far-right ideologies across Europe, in times of increasing immigration flows. The interconnection and the interconnection of all these policies is very difficult to achieve. And for an academic institution, for an academic committee, a committee that deals with issues within the academic community, it's very difficult to find a fine balance between what we're supposed to do as academics, on the one hand, what the legislation permits us to do, and what as members of the community, as active citizens, wish to do. This is not an easy issue sometimes. We need to make some decisions, and as all the decisions, there are mistakes always. There are back and forth all the time. There's no any easy answer to those sensitivities about identities, about work-life balance. It's not easy, especially in environments such as a university or a state organization, let's say. There are also bureaucracies. There is also bureaucratic inertia. There is understaffing, as I mentioned before. It's not an easy task to say that we promised 5, 10 things and we should be doing this within the next year. It's not easy. It's difficult. Sometimes we ourselves, as members of the community, have not clear ideas of what does it mean to say male, female, and other. We don't have this. If we solve this kind of issues, this kind of conceptual issues, if you like, then we will be able to solve problems. And most of all, in my opinion, there needs to be a political will at the top level. We're talking about governments, and governments of the institutions themselves, not only of the state.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dionysius. I don't know whether Marta or Isabella would like to add something, comment, or disagree. I agree.
I agree on one side that for sure we need a framework legislation maybe to have more legal aspects to support our decision in the gender equality plan implementation. On the other side, maybe we need also to promote something bottom up in the sense that students, young generation ask for a different, at least more open. So sometimes it's enough to say men, women, other. So maybe just little bit of change in some, for example, in the University of Macerata, we introduced the alias career. So if students want to be register as men or women, independent of the sex and gender and things like that, we have some options. Obviously, it's difficult, it was a long process, but small things maybe we can do while waiting for different legislation or definition, because it's difficult. Gender identity is very personal. And to find a law definition, I think it will be not very difficult, or unless we go to the gender neutral option. So gender, sex doesn't matter at all. We don't ask you. We don't think is important, but maybe then we have hidden inequalities that we could not check. I don't know, just a comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabella. There is a question from Katerina Toscu in the chat. What if the policies were introduced in regional level and not in a national and or European level?
Would you want to answer?
Dionysius?
It's okay, I can wait. I have just spoken, so there are other panelists. I have my opinion on that, but later on, if you like.
Yes, but please, probably you could start since your presentation focused on the relation of the region with the university and with local authorities.
Yeah, I said that it is important for the university to introduce policies to initiate attempts for networking at regional and at local level. So I consider it very important. I don't think how much lever would that be for the national policies, how much we could push forward by introducing a regional level or local level initiatives. I think this is important. That's why we tried it as a JEC in my university. But at national level, there needs more regional attempts and networking to be done in order to push forward, because as you all know, as many countries are, we are very centralized state, the Greek state. So sometimes there needs to be a cooperation in the regional cooperation. But I believe in bottom-up attempts. I believe so. Ideologically, politically, I believe in that. It's difficult. It's difficult. That's my humble opinion.
And probably we should mention that in Greece, at least lately, the gender equality committees in all municipalities. Yes, and some of them, they can collaborate with the universities, the gender equality committees at the university. I don't know how the situation in Italy or in Ukraine.
As I mentioned before, though, we face many problems because of the rigid bureaucracies and the hierarchical nature of how the governments operate. So, okay, this is very encouraging to have a network, but as I said before, actually it withers away. It stopped, I mean, it expired, the protocol. We have not reactivated, yes, 1 year almost after the expiration, and we're still working on that. So this is really difficult, and sometimes it is based on personality traits. Sometimes some people with commitment should push forward. It's not only the organizational culture. Sometimes if you lack the specific person who has tried a lot to build the network, then it disintegrates the whole attempt, because we have the legislation, but not, let's say, a collective attitude, maybe, that would support really. We don't have this automatically made changes. We need persons. Persons still count in our societies. We don't have only, or we shouldn't have only legislative framework. We should have committed persons, and this is the hard part. This is the hard part.
Yeah.
Yeah, also I would like to add about the national, like regional and European adoption. I think that while policies introduced in regional level, it may face limitation in scope. They can act as crucial models for national and European adoption by engaging with local communities, adapting to specific regional needs, and demonstrating successful outcomes. Regional policies can influence like broader systemic change. With careful monitoring, collaboration, advocacy, these policies can become a powerful force for national and European-wide gender equality reform.
Thank you, Marta. There is a question from Katerina Tosco, I think.
Yeah, I would like to elaborate more my thinking because the written form is not very explicit. Apologies for that. I'm both supporting and attending this conference. My question.
No, we don't see you. We don't see you.
You want?
Of course. Yes. Okay. Fine.
Of course.
Better.
So basically what I was wondering is because recently I finished my master degree in sex, civilization and society here in the UAG, and so we were discussing about how successful could be like measures to for legal measures, and sometimes it comes up that people that working upon the legislation, how they could implement some plans, they tend to forget like the regional characteristic of each region in Greece, in Italy, I don't know, in Mexico, because ethnographically speaking and in terms of society, perhaps it's for sure that each society has its own, let's say, characteristics. So I'm just wondering if we count how successful something is regarding the equality. Let's be specific on that. How successfully can it be if we integrate it in a way that people can feel it like more, step by step, more close to them, or just present a plan and be like that, steer legal language? So I'm just wondering if such a strategic I don't know, methods are implemented, or we're just expecting to be successful just by do this dissemination that perhaps is not sufficient for a specific target audience. I don't know if you understand my point. Feel free, everyone, and thank you very much for the presentations. Were very interesting, all of them.
You mean that we have to take into account also different parameters like age, for example, or education or locality?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know in what extent this actually is on the track. I mean, at least I have not noticed in a European level. I see some, for example, initiatives now in the social media that Europe has a new people like teenagers promoting different initiatives, European initiatives, and I suspect that this start to push younger people to participate. But I don't know if regionally speaking, for example, Greece has in mind to do something like that, or yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katerina. This is a very important topic that you've raised. Thanks. Yeah. And I think that somehow could be also connected to a point made by Isabella when she mentioned that there was a difference in the opinions between students and academic staff, and students seem to be more aware about gender differentiation and the problems of it. And from our own experience preparing the gender equality plan at the University of the Aegean, we had the same experience, and there were also differences between the administrative and academic staff. The administrative staff were more aware of gender differences than academic staff. And I think this is really interesting. So it brings us to the question that not only the age, so where you come from, but also your profession, your family situation makes a significant difference. So from this perspective, I think I have to return back to the topic of the conference, the gender innovation. So how can we use gender to analyze all these different issues of discrimination and difference, and to bring it back into the fore. Is there a final comment from our presenters before we go for a break?
Thanks, first of all, to all this, because many ideas and many important aspects to implement projects and future research and activities. And just to link to the last comments you did, we use this word of intersectional approach that, is very abused sometimes. Everyone now speaking about intersectionality, but I don't want to go into this detail. The idea is to keep different categories of life experience, or gender, age, profession, as you told before. Maybe when we are thinking about measure special activities for a targeted group, so just try to include different aspects in this perspective. So maybe this could be useful to avoid too much standardization. We know that some standardized measures are needed, but maybe we can also give place for different situations. So that's my final. And thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you all for your presentations and discussion. I will go now for a break, and we will be back at 11:20 Central European Time, 12:20 in Greece.
Okay, thank you.
See you
Bye.
later.
Thank you.
Our keynote lecture. Thanks. Well, we can start now. I would like to welcome Chrysi Vitilaki, Professor Emerita and former Rector of the University of the Aegean, Greece. Chrysi Vitilaki has been since 1990 a professor of the Department of Preschool Education and Educational Design, and she was also director of the master program Gender and New Educational and Work Environments in the Information Society. Chrysi Vitilaki has served as a Dean of the School of Humanities, Vice Rector of Economic Planning and Development, and Rector of the University of the Aegean. We are pleased to have you with us here today. Professor Vitilaki, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Venetia. Thank you all for being here. I think what I would like to say, and I will try to compress it in a couple of sort of conclusions by taking a look in the past after we have heard what is happening today, to draw some conclusions about what in fact is the development of the dialectic between what society is undergoing, what policy and governments come to take, what universities do on their part, along with the rest of the educational system, to educate people, and at the same time, and maybe above all, or a necessary prerequisite to all of this, what can gender studies programs or programs aimed at formally at educating our newer generation or even the adults in this generation in the issues of gender and the dialectic of development of gender in our societies as well. So I think the real answer to all of these things that we were discussing before is indeed to realize, if you allow me to share.
Yes, we can see it. Please, can you try that it changes as well, the slides?
Come again?
No, we can see the presentation.
Okay.
That was fine. Just check where the slides are changing.
Okay, this is the second one. Okay. Can you still see the presentation?
No.
All right.
Unfortunately not.
Okay. So our presentation is here. The slides are changing.
Yes, fine. That's fine. Yes, perfect.
So the long title that I had given to this problematic that I wanted to place in our forum today, and the one that I practically gave the conclusion of, is the fact that really we need to continuously, as academics, as researchers, as citizens, as men, as women, whichever identities we take on, in reconceptualizing continuously what is gender and contextualizing it within the societies that we live in, looking forward, drawing on the lessons of the past, and how this can particularly be done in the teaching and research of gender, because this is so important, and as I just said, a necessary prerequisite for creating a new generation that will create a new generation of researchers and activists, I would say, as well, in gender studies, in order to make this a better and more equal world for all of us. As you said, I will say a few words about the Gender Studies Master's program that we began, but more of a case in point than anything else. In effect, I've already said what is the general framework that makes me think between what we have done all of these years and where we're at and where we can go from here, is to realize that our own academic and research activities on gender and our own perspectives are clearly very much related to what is happening socially, economically, culturally, politically, technologically, and so on in our own societies. And on the other hand, it is, that's why I refer to a dialectic. It is these conditions that create our understanding of gender and form the gender differences and inequalities that we see, and the gender and identities that we see at each point. So our study changes things while it perceives these things that are happening in the sphere of gender within our societies at each point in time. There is no way to distinguish what is happening or go to an essentialist understanding of gender, because gender is clearly, and that's us social scientists, what we have been all along saying, it is a social construction, and as such clearly it comes out of and is formed by the conditions that we're living in, and it is constantly redefined exactly because our world, the world that we live in, is continuously changing. So by definition, and I think this is the answer to much of the points that were made before, or the questions that were answered, the academic study of gender has been diachronically shaped by the historical context, and that in itself has changed the world. And it has changed the world because when it first started, we know that gender studies in effect came as an outcome or as a result, or in order to address the women's rights that since the 19th century were being fought for. Thus, gender studies, especially at the beginning, were very much linked to activism. And the documentation that we systematically and scientifically brought through gender research, together, though, with this activist pursuit for greater gender equality that the previous generations have finally brought changes in policy, whether it be at governmental level or going all the way down. And in that way, they changed and they keep changing the different foci of gender studies, and of course the different loci and the different forms of gender inequalities in our societies, with the differences that each one of our societies experiences. Because we are discussing this within the framework of a European big project, and because we are discussing it around the European table, we need to think that this dialectic development of the study programs, in effect, was a result and was also formed by clearly not only the activism, but also the policies that came to be addressed in much relation with the activism, but also with the changing conditions in Europe and globally. We know that the European Economic Union, the first unification effort, had put already from its inception in the Treaty of Rome the first principle and the basic principle, which was at the time the requirement, which was equal pay. This was in effect all that the research was doing in between to try and make sure that we take steps toward redressing that major and very apparent and very broad discrepancy between the wages of men and women in the 20th century. With the onset of the 21st century, there had clearly changed a lot in our society, socioeconomically, politically, and otherwise. And given that we had the majority of social democratic countries, and activism was very strong and had put on the agenda the issues of gender, we had the legislation of gender mainstreaming, and this was, of course, mainly in the Treaty of Amsterdam in 98, which made two basic things. It legislated gender mainstreaming. That means the principle that gender needs to cut through all aspects of life, all aspects of everyday functioning in all spheres of social, economic, and private life. And that was a major difference from going to just one issue, which at the time was important, equal pay, to making this horizontal foundational principle of seeking to make gender present everywhere. And of course, as you already know, in our societies, based on this legislation at European level, came to be legislated at national levels with a lot of laws regarding women in education, in politics, in the workplace, the harassment, coming, and now you can see that much of that legislation seems to have ameliorated conditions and these aspects of gender differences in society. Our previous speakers did on gender or broader. And I'm saying this just to tie in to the understanding that this dialectic continuously changes, as do all of these things that we asked for, which was funding, which was legislating at all levels, higher and lower, and so on. the more important, as I said, from the gender mainstreaming legal effort at European Union was the fact that it was exactly put into the structural funds that were at the time big budgets in Europe that were giving money in order to change the national economies and societies in the European Union, and the framework program, which supported even more research and technical development. And this was the major breakthrough. It was in relation to what we now see, all of these efforts within the Horizon programs. It was, these new efforts are daunted in front of how major of a breakthrough for gender and gender studies and gender research was this period, which in effect provided not only the framework, the legal framework, but also the financing tools for realizing this fundamental commitment to gender mainstreaming. And this is what came to give a critical a boost to the development of academic gender studies programs all over Europe, and particularly in Greece, where especially in the period 2000 to 2006, we saw an unprecedented surge of calls for funding for introducing mainstreaming gender and gender education within all sectors, but especially education. There were a lot of funds poured into through a national co-funded project, which was the PAEC, as we called it, and it gave extensive and very generous funding for gender mainstreaming at all levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary universities. And it was aimed both at those teaching in the universities or in the schools, and the students themselves, at sensitizing and educating them in what is gender inequality, in which areas do we see it, how can we address it, and so on. Of course, along with this gender mainstreaming, we had the first realization within European policy and the framework that the environment and technology were very important pillars which we needed to relate to all of the functioning of society, including the approaches to gender. So in our Greek higher education, we had major schemes, the three most important ones of which were one, an effort to mainstream gender and at the same time environmental protection and technological development in existing undergraduate programs. Another one was the funding of undergraduate gender studies programs in the universities. And a third one that is what we will here be discussing more was the postgraduate programs of study and research on gender and gender equality. But I'm mentioning all of these to show that this funding of gender mainstreaming was really broad, very expensive, very extensive, and it created many of the effects that we see today with the status that the gender problematic, let's say, in general has in our Greek society. We were very happy, and I personally was very happy to be involved in applying for almost all of these competitive funds. And we managed to secure for the university in that period, 2004, 2006, more than €1 million, if you can understand what that means in terms of even today's money, for getting projects on three levels: the gender mainstreaming of environment, gender and digital innovation. We did it in our preschool education and educational design department that I had the luck together with Dionysis and other colleagues to be part of and lead. We created the most highly financed program in all of the programs of Greek universities which were about 7 or 8, if I'm not mistaken, by creating a central action for gender, in which we designed and offered to all of the departments in our university, which is an island university, online for the first time, undergraduate gender studies programs along the axis of the main axis of employment and new technologies, but also culture, education, and so on and so forth. And we created 2 gender studies master's programs, one in Venetia's Department of Social Anthropology and History, apologies for only anthropology, and one in the Department of Sciences of Preschool Education and Educational Design, in which me and Dionysis were serving and were working on. The conclusions I want to say in advance regarding the design and implementation of all of these projects. And I want you to think about your own experiences with applying for all of these new funding schemes that are now running, and in this ERUA project that we are now working on, and the other programs that you are doing on gender, and think as we conclude about our experience back then, that these programs were developed and left a long-standing impact because they were funded. And they were funded for a period long enough to either produce results and become self-sustained, or not have further funding, not being able to stand on their feet autonomously, and dwindled away. So if these programs, I am absolutely convinced about this, as I am sure that you are, if you think about the projects that you here presented and the other ones that you're running, they would not have been implemented really, and have not had the continuous success we had. Here I say 14 years, it was about 10 years, but then it had an aftermath in running our master's program. And the reason why we got the funding, which made us successful and long-lasting, was exactly because we addressed directly these national and European policies about gender mainstreaming. And as you, I am sure, have done, we went to the T, checking that what were the requirements of the policymakers, so that we would address those requirements in order to be able to secure funding. And I have to say that I think we succeeded, and I'm sure you will be succeeding as well. ERUA has succeeded, and I'm very, very proud to have brought the Alliance as rector to the university, and to still be able to be part of it. We did it in a very, very innovative manner. To say a few words about these Masters of Gender and New Educational and Occupational Environments in the Information Society, which is, you see our logo up right to the left on my slides. We launched it in the academic year 2004-05, and it ran very successfully until 2013-14. I must say that once we got the funding and we had set it up and ready to go for the first year, and it ran for the first year, we discontinued the request for funding, and we ran it autonomously. Why? Because we had managed to create a successful program, a very innovative program that had relatively very high tuition at the time, but that secured that it was self-sufficient. The program was purposely designed, as I said, to address not only the policies based on which it had secured the funding, because we gave it back, but more importantly, to address the specific conditions in our society that were the major issues of gender and gender identity and social inequality in Greece. And the second very innovative aspect of our master's program was its content and its form of delivery. In terms of the content, we made it broad enough to give an important understanding to our graduate students of how gender not only needs to be studied, but needs to be related to the main axis of social and economic and cultural functioning, which in our case, we chose education, employment, and new technologies. We studied these dimensions autonomously, but also very strongly in related to gender and gender inequality in these sectors. Also, our modules were interdisciplinary because it is clear, I'm sure to all of you, that we need the light of all of the different social sciences disciplines, and not only, in order to understand gender from biology, in order to be able to answer biological explanations of gender and gender differences, in order to be able to address them, of course, and cast away that perspective and help people understand how gender is formulated within society, through society and through societal procedures. And we were very proud to have very important people at the same time co-teach the different units from different disciplines, thus realizing, in effect, this interdisciplinary approach. Our form of delivery at the time was really unique and technologically advanced. As far as we know, to this day, it was the only master's program that ran at national level, not only on gender, certainly at that period and even until recently, that was developed fully online in view of our expertise of e-learning and educational processes, not just technological. It was digitally supported by very rich digital educational resources and learning activities and fora and so on. It was offered both synchronously and asynchronously, as we all came to learn during the pandemic. At that time, it was not very much heard of. And we even introduced virtual reality. We created virtual reality spaces for carrying out classes, some of them, of course, not all, and collaborating spaces. Students would get together and have coffee chats in a virtual reality space. And in addition to all of that, in the summer, we would have 1 or 2 weeks of seminars and workshops with very high caliber invited guest speakers from all over the world. All of this really elicited a sustainable, for a decade, great response. We had set up very intricate algorithms at the time to evaluate the 150 to 250 plus prospective students that each year applied to get a position for only 40 places that we were offering. And this innovative character and all of these things that we had carried out throughout this period, especially the first years, led and supported the 2009 first e-learning prize award, which our school secured from the European Foundation for Quality in E-Learning of the European Commission. And a few years later, at national level, our department received the 2012 the commendation of the Ministry of Education for academic excellence after being evaluated by the unique project in Europe and being certified for carrying out a high quality academic program through e-learning. But as all good things in this life, after a dozen practically, but in effect, practically 10 years, this very high demand, high successfully and recognized innovating program had run its course. The social and economic conditions and the technological developments had drastically changed the context within which gender and gender studies and research thrived. Particularly the advances of technology, sorry for missing T there, together with the conditions created by the pandemic across about 3 years, as you all know in your everyday lives, came to drastically alter both the structure and the functioning of global, European, and national economies, societies, cultures, and consequently the nature of academia, the nature of carrying out academic activities, and of course the nature of carrying out gender study programs, both because they refer to gender, and secondly, which then became much lesser of a priority, and because we have gotten acquainted with way more advanced technologies, which became mainstream themselves. So we have to realize that after its first very strong phase, and after the completion of these funded gender mainstreaming programs, and with the change that it brought about in our societies and cultures that began really to understand the importance of gender, in effect, that started to wane as social conditions changed, social, technological, economic, cultural, and so on. We get this from our students themselves, who in the interviews after 2010, where we changed our program and started a new program on new forms of education and learning, which was then in demand. See, we changed academic programs to respond to societal needs and technological developments. In effect, they were telling us, even in the one course that we had kept very important and alive in the new master's program, they were not so much interested in this. They were interested in all the benefits that the online learning brings about. So the importance of gender had waned in the collective subconscious and conscious, I would say. And the adults that we were calling to come to our master's program had clearly gone beyond the fervor of our first years of students, incoming students that we had, where they just wanted to become gender experts and work in a public or private sector to bring in this problematic and this knowledge that they had about gender. Now they were just interested in the employability that they would secure through a master's program. I can't but say, because this is also a personal experience, it may be, and I hope it is only in our case, but I know it is at national level happening in Greece, the first passionate group of men and women who brought in gender studies, the majority of them who were very active and still remain to this day very active activists, studying and researching, but also working on changing people's hearts and minds about gender, have closed pretty much their academic cycles. We were very lucky to have collaborators much younger than the majority of us that created, I think all of us that created these gender studies programs or led them. Of course, we didn't create them by ourselves. We left very, very important academics behind, at least in our universities, such as Venetia and Dionysus and a lot of other colleagues that are with us, continuing to burn the torch of gender concern and gender studies. Today we still are concerned with gender. We still have many individual courses that are still running. We run a lot of research projects, and especially our younger and more important than us colleagues. But that fervent, activistic, and at the same time innovative character of strong and sustainable programs of gender studies was no longer. So what does that tell us? If we compare it to the fact that now we see around this table, and of course in other aspects of our life, a resurgence of the concern with gender, but with a new emphasis, quote unquote new. The phenomena is since the inception of men and women on this earth, but now it is the one thing that we're all concerned about, or that we're all studying and talking about, which is gender-based violence. In the past decade, we have had practically a monodimensional concern with this phenomenon, which has very much helped to bring forth the voices that make all of society realize that it is a very major and important form of social inequality, that it has to stop, that it is a totally unacceptable a social phenomenon that stems from gender, as long as we understand what gender today is, which are the gender identities which develop in the passage of time, dialectically with the new conditions and with the understanding of what gender is. And the only thing that I can say is that we see another example of this research, these programs, the one that we are now involved in, are still here because they're being funded. So we need, on the one hand, to keep demanding funding in order to not only sustain this study and research now being done, but to prepare for the next major social gender problematic that will come to the fore because of our socioeconomic and technological context. And so at the same time, to realize, as Dionysis at some point and Venetia tried to say, it's not enough to have funding. For me, it's an absolute precondition, because we have to keep asking for governments at all levels, from national, local, European, to keep their money where their mouth is about promoting still to this day gender equality. But at the same time, we ourselves as researchers, as academics, we have to work much more in a theoretical and research-based understanding of the new forms of gendered identities that are emerging in majority or in minority, without forgetting, and allow me to please stress this, that the majority of these forms is still women. Women in our societies, which are the everyday women that understand themselves in the very traditional concept of what it means to be a woman. And we have to understand the new forms of gender inequalities and the differences and the experiences that all of our sexualities have in everyday life. And more importantly, we need to stress and focus on the new threats and on the new challenges that are posed today for the advances that we have thus far secured, the rights and the equalities that we have thus far secured by the conditions of the new post-pandemic socioeconomic and political order, and by the very important and mind-boggling technological advances that we are experiencing. As our societies change, the new realities and the priorities of Europe and our own national and local settings are the ones that, together with our better understanding than others of gender and gender equality in its development, lead us to radically rethink our theoretical and methodological tools for studying the gendered identities and sexualities of today, their experiences, what is the everyday experience, which leads to inequalities or not, and to rethink and research the old and new forms of inequalities that all of us and each one of our members of our society are subject to today. Moreover, we need to grasp academically and in terms of research the gendered experience within the context of these profound technological transformations that are underway. And we ourselves, as we did in the past with innovative projects that I tried to give you an example of, to use the tools and capacities of technology. We need to master these tools and capacities, and especially artificial intelligence, first of all, in order to understand it, and second of all, in order to be in a position to use it as the spearhead for bringing innovation to support the developments of the new gender study approaches that will be coming. And you yourselves and your students and our students will be using in teaching, in learning, in experiencing gender while securing at the same time equality and inclusion for all. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this really rich presentation. I think it gave us a very good historical picture from gender in...
I have a long history.
in Greek academia, at least in Greece, in the 21st century. And the significance of the institutions of European funding, but also of national context in terms of universities and interest. And I think I have to agree with you that gender is ever-changing, and this is what we have to do, and we have to focus on it. So I suggest that we keep the significance of gender as an analytical tool to see and discuss and analyze all these discriminations and inequalities. On the other hand, I just want to add that there is still a great interest in gender and in gender studies, at least from younger generations, and we can see this in numbers of people who are willingly to do a master in gender studies, either at the University of the Aegean or the online in the Open University. But gender is not the same as it used to be 20 years ago, but I think this is in the very meaning of gender, that gender is something that ever changes
That's exactly what I meant to say.
Theoretical and methodological. Yeah, I think that, and thank you. I think that we still have a couple of minutes for 1-2 questions, if there are some, or comments on part of the participants. Yes, please, Silvana.
Hi, and thank you so much for this very, very interesting review of what you were able to achieve in Greece, which seems to me quite a lot, so congratulations. My question it's not a question, but really I'm curious to know whether you think that today, given all the changes in the context that you have highlighted, we actually need to strengthen the link between gender studies, so gender as an academic pursuit, let's put it this way, and activism. Because I think there might be a way of renewing also the academic approach if we pay more attention to what activists are doing, are saying, to their strategies. So I wonder whether we need to kind of renew the kind of link.
I think absolutely, but you know, this is unfortunately something that can't be dictated. But it is something that can be sought if, as teachers ourselves, pass on this passion that we have for understanding the other and try to give our students the tools to understand the other and his or her experience. I will take the example that Dionysis presented before about taking gender change at the level of the local. And there we see that when you have some programs that are funding, they may function, but then after a while people change, they're no longer interested. So whole structures that we have set up really are not addressed. I understand that the first the first period of women fighting for the vote or for equal pay, and all of these generations at each point have different ones. We are a generation, myself included, that was raised with many of the accomplishments of securing equality. I rose to the top levels of academia, and I cannot talk about equality in academia being forbidden, but I can keep saying that out of all of the rectors in Greece, very few. We have managed in all of our years to have 4 or 5 of us. All the rest have been men from our history, okay? So interest and understanding of gender in itself, if taught with this more fervor, I would say, not getting people to make how do you say, a big campaign outside in the courtyard and say, tonight we will, make a night for gender. But you can make all sorts of activities that refer to the interest of the young generation. We can call them either in a chat. I have done it in an augmented reality class where I was showing my students the new glasses that they wear, and I called them to discuss about their gender experiences because they didn't have enough gender classes in our department right now. You understand what I mean? We need to instill some passion, because what we have accomplished was not made by governments. In effect, we are the ones which, with our study, with our documents, with our research, with our teaching, created generations which Venetia just affirmed, as I very well have the experience, that understand gender. But Venetia, what is the danger? They take gender as a given and gender equality as a given. In my freshman class, I would teach it and I would say, which of you think that there's gender inequality? They would all say, there isn't. And then you have to go and explain to them where inequality is serious, inequality is really lie. We have to tell them that they need to master all the tools that the economy and technology at this point is giving them. Otherwise, they will be left behind. And the digital divide that we know exists will keep being perpetuated. And then we will come decades later to research the major digital divide in our societies. So we're at a critical point for those that have delved into understanding artificial intelligence. Before you know it, avatars or even persons looking like you will be reaching your students and talking about, sexist propaganda much more effectively than we in our classes will be having. We are here to understand this in order to absolutely prevent it, but use the tools at the same time to reach our new generation that will be raised within this framework and will understand these tools and technologies better than we do. Technology is only a tool, but unfortunately at this point, we're entering an age where it is such a strong tool that will permeate all aspects of our lives. And if there is something I have to say is, given that socioeconomic and cultural and technological environments shape our identities and the forms of inequality that exist, we need to understand which are the important conditions at the present so that we will give the best tools and theoretical research and passion to our students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I hope it answered your question in some way.
Very extensively. Thank you. Thanks.
If I may add something to Silvana's comment, probably it's also related to the discussion whether gender has been weakened, has been more weaker because of its institutionalization, because it has been developed in academia. And there's discussion whether it should be more concerned and collaborate with groups and communities outside academia. It is related with our first panel, but I think this is a question that needs to be targeted still. Okay, thank you. Is there any other question, other comment, anything else? Okay.
Thank you very much.
If not, thank you so much. We will go for a break now, and then we will return at 1 o'clock Central European Time, 2 o'clock in Greece, for our second session moderated by Silvana Colella. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Welcome, everybody, to this second panel in the conference. The overall topic is vulnerability. I am Silvana Colella. I'm a professor of English literature and also at the University of Macerata, also Vice Chancellor for Research at Macerata. And in this capacity, I am 100% committed to furthering the aims and ambitious goals of ERUA. You already know the drills. So you have each presentation has about 15 minutes, then 5 minutes of Q&A, and then more questions and answers at the end of the panel. So let me introduce the first presenters, Nicolò Ingarra and Alessio Panaggio. Nicolò is research fellow and PhD students at the University of Macerata, so we know each other very well. And his main research interest concerns the relationship between well-being, health, and the work environment in the light of transformations and challenges affecting organizations, and he adopts an intersectional approach. Alessio Panaggio is a PhD candidate in gender studies at the Aldo Moro University of Bari in the south of Italy. He works on vulnerability in the field of political philosophy and philosophy of human rights. Alessio and Nicolò, the screen is yours.
So, hello to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this really transdisciplinary conference. Of course, I would like to thank Professor Colella for the introduction. I'm going to share my presentation. Okay. So, my presentation stems from a collaboration with the colleague Alessio Panaggio, with whom I share most of my research interests. Well, coming to our discourse in today's conference, I will first provide a theoretical political overview of the issue of vulnerability, which my colleague has worked on primarily. And then I will move on the practical implications of the intersectional understanding of vulnerability and the tools to comprehend context from and beyond genders. The philosophical debate around theories of vulnerability has intensified in recent years, as we know. This has been influenced by the mass death events such as the recent pandemic and the emergence of conflicts that place the civilian population in a seriously fragile condition. The scope of the vulnerability paradigm is extended from sociology to bioethics to legal theories, which emphasize the generative nature of the concept. Vulnerability is placed either at the basis of the redevelopment of democratic institutions or as a new principle through which equality can be remodeled. As far as our discourse is concerned, it's worth remembering that vulnerability is a concept well analyzed by feminist critical theory. In particular, the philosopher Judith Butler contributed to the configuration of a relational ontology dictated by vulnerability, which defines a geometry of the individual based on her or his inclination towards the other. The author highlights the coexistence of two dimensions of vulnerability, precariness and precarity. Human corporeality equalizes and differentiates, while subjectivity is to be considered vulnerable by virtue of the common condition of exposure to risk, hence the universal dimension of vulnerability, precariousness. Precarity refers to that vulnerability induced by sociality, which conceives the individual as an intrinsically social being. And it is because of this second form of vulnerability that there is a differential distribution of exposure to risk. Applying the concept in question to human rights in order to synthesize an ontological condition means considering individuals vulnerable not only because they are because of their corporeity or subjective characteristics, but as a consequence of their being placed within relationships. And these relationships are always modifiable and exposed to the action of others. The category of ontological vulnerability holds potential when applied to the human rights, aimed on the one hand at identifying situations of rights violations, and on the other because it represents a tool through which to qualify the subject of rights. Indeed, universality and relationality are two characteristics consistent with human rights theories, as vulnerability is a condition that characterizes every living being, although it shows itself in changeable ways, not only due to variables endogenous but to the individual, but also to the exposure to exogenous variables dictated by different concrete contexts. For this reason, reference to the ontological conception of vulnerability can lead human rights implementation processes by shifting the point of observation from subjectivity to context. In this sense, it's a matter of extending the application of a subjectivist term that refers to a social, cultural, political, economic environment. Every context can be analyzed both reflexively, referring to them as vulnerable, and performatively, in terms of their capacity to be vulnerating. In the first instance, a vulnerable context is one that is exposed to risk and therefore becomes vulnerating. A vulnerating context emphasizes its potential to generate vulnerabilities or exacerbate existing ones. A vulnerable and then vulnerating context is also represented by those organizations that do not question the inclusion of people in transition who feel uncomfortable with their gender identity. Such context, in fact, is vulnerable because it exposes itself to the risk of exclusion of these individuals, and it becomes vulnerating to the extent that it generates inequalities. This means addressing the exogenous variables that contribute to the differential distribution of vulnerability mentioned by Butler, and referring to plural subjects placed in relation to the other within contexts that change in space and time. The application of the vulnerability paradigm to contexts makes it possible to analyze all those regulatory texts and/or programs adopted to intervene in this, on the social inequalities that underlie the differential distribution of risk exposure. So, from a practical point of view, it then becomes appropriate to refer to some tools that, if used with the right gender lens, can enable us to understand and intervene within organizational contexts in a structural manner. Specifically, I refer to the Gender Equality Plan, to the Gender Balance Sheet, and the so-called Alias Career. Specifically, I refer, first of all, to the Gender Equality Plan. As already outlined in the previous presentation of Professor Crespi and Scocco, a Gender Equality Plan is a policy document aimed at implementing actions and projects that favor the reduction of gender asymmetries, while enabling the valorization of diversity within an organization. Well, the Gender Equality Plan represents an attempt to bring about organizational change for gender equality, and it is understood here as a methodological tool useful to act in vulnerable contexts, within academic environments in particular. The underrepresentation of women in decision-making positions is only the most visible manifestation of gender discrimination, but structural inequalities in academia are more deeply rooted and have also been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The gender equality plan translates this into a series of actions to promote gender equality by targeting changes in academic contexts. Gender equality plans are thus recognized as a useful tool to promote cultural change by attempting to adjust the balance of power between genders. The drafting process of this document, being the outcome of discussions and cooperation between different parties, also fosters common awareness of structural gender inequalities. The gender inequalities are thus considered vulnerabilities induced or exacerbating to a certain extent by the academic context. Applying the vulnerability paradigm to the academic context means not only focusing on existing structural inequalities, but also offering a way through which gender equality can be pursued. Using the lens of vulnerability as it is conceived here, such an approach might avoid categorizing vulnerable individuals and or groups, thus applying the relational ontological conception of vulnerability that we are discussing. In this sense, the JEP could represent an attempt to apply the vulnerability paradigm to specific contexts. Furthermore, references should be made to contexts both insofar they are analyzed prior to the adoption of actions and as the recipients of the actions indicated in the gender equality plan itself. From this point of view, it should be emphasized that, that in the Italian case, the gender equality plan may represent a shared and reproducible best practice of implementation of this of the vulnerability paradigm applied to contexts. It is worth mentioning that an analysis carried out on a sample, for instance, of 58 Italian gender equality plans, shows that only 18 universities provided a complete context analysis for only a partial one, while most did not provide any information on context analysis. This shows how, for many academic realities, the context in relation to policy implementation represents an immobile background in which the policies themselves move. However, it follows from these considerations that it would be appropriate instead to veer towards a different application in the light of the vulnerability. Moving on, as a further tool to consider, there's the gender balance sheet. It is another both descriptive and programmatic document inserted within the gender-sensitive performance cycle that an organization can adopt and that aims to achieve greater transparency on the allocation of budgetary resources and their impact on men as well as on women. Through this tool, it is possible to understand the employment segregation in both the vertical and the horizontal sense of women within the organizational context. Vulnerability is not taken in this case for granted, but must be understood and analyzed in the different forms in which it presents itself. Reading through the interpretative scheme of intersectionality, for instance, allows us to understand, for example, that a greater prevalence of women does not mean overcoming gender inequalities. What also matters is the top or not topical role women play or tasks that and issues they deal with. In this sense, the integration of several tools makes it possible to analyze contexts with a substantial look and avoid falling also into pinkwashing practices. Finally, the other instrument that I would like to explain is the ALICE career. The alias career is probably a more operational tool. It is a name change policy that allows people who have started a gender transition process to choose a name other than the one on their civil registry. This is a great protection in countries such as Italy, and not only a symbolic protection, where the transition process is still pathologized and lengthy. This instrument has been activated mainly by the majority of the Italian universities. The first legal landmark for alias career in Italy is, for instance, law number 164 of 1982 on the subject of civil sex rectification. Initially, the jurisprudential approach that authorized sex attribution or rectification only after surgery on primary sexual characteristics was prevalent. That approach underwent a significant change as a result of the rulings of Italian Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court, which found the compulsory nature of the surgery to be contrary to Articles 2, 3, and 32 of the Constitution, as well as the Article 8 of the European Charter of Human Rights. And the most recent soft law instruments on the transsexuality. So the opportunity to adopt such a change in name policy enhances the principle of gender self-determination, fully respecting the dignity of the person. In Italy, a model, at least as far as academia is concerned, has been provided by the National Conference of Equality Bodies of Italian University, which has drafted guidelines urging university to adopt alias career policies. During my research on this topic, through the interviews, for instance, I had with the people concerned, I perceived the suffering of those who see themselves identified and appointed according to gender patterns that do not belong to them. The use of an alias career while waiting for a formal name change represents, to a certain extent, at least a step forward. Therefore, starting with gender and going beyond genders is really important from an organizational welfare point of view. However, there is a lot of work to be done here, especially on the limits still of this policy, since there are subjective limits, because often the alias career is only extended to students and not all the academic staff. There are also objective limits, because the name of election only applies within the organization. Also, there are medical limits, because a psychiatric certificate is often still required, even though gender dysphoria is no longer considered a pathology. Lastly, we cannot fail to mention the political attack on the principle of gender self-determination. I can say that for my research work, the University of Macerata in the national panorama fully embraces this instrument, trying to overcome these limits as far as possible. At this point, I conclude this presentation by emphasizing once again the importance of events such as this, where we can discuss and share open issues which are crucial for our academic institutions. Gender has to be considered an open-ended question, and this is because the goal of gender equality must be addressed to ask what the impacts within organizational contexts are from a gender perspective. By the way, this is also the aim of a gender mainstreaming approach, as we have just discussed during this first part of the conference. So I thank you for the attention, and I leave the floor for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Nicolò. If you can stop sharing your screen, that would be good. Okay, thank you. Venezia, do we have a couple of minutes for at least a question or so? Because
I'm afraid not, because
it's a little tight. So Shall we hold on until the very end when we have a final Q&A? Okay, I apologize for this, but we must move on to the second paper today, the second presentation. I'm not sure whether both presenters are here or just Monica.
No, I'm just here, the only one.
Just Monica. So we'll start with you, Monica. Monica is Monica Petkeviciute. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Monica is a researcher at MRU in the Quality of Life Lab, which is led by your other colleague, Ona Rakauskine. Again, sorry for the mispronouncing. And Monica is a lecturer at the Institute of Business and Economics. Her research interests include gender economics, institutional quality, the effect of financing on individual economic phenomena, and innovation development. So Monica, go ahead. We will hear more about resilience rather than vulnerability, and it's good that we do so. Please.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. I will try to share my screen. Okay. So our team at the Gender Economics Laboratory has conducted extensive research on women's resilience in turbulent times. And I'm glad for the opportunity to present our findings today, which focus on developing research-based innovative socio-economic approaches to strengthen women's resilience. So the pressing issue of insecurity is a major challenge facing our society today, as we live in a world of worry. So today, growing human insecurity, the potential of incurable pandemics, unprecedented social economic inequalities, intensify of international conflicts, the cascading ecological consequences of climate change, and the disruptive challenges of digitalization are fostering a pervasive sense of human vulnerability, unease, and instability, compounded by a critical deficit in our collective understanding of how to fight these interrelated challenges effectively. The data from the 10th wave of the European Social Surveys shows that the value of security is the most dominant value in Lithuania, and the one that best describes our people. Almost 2/3 of respondents said that it is important for Lithuanians to live in a safe environment, to avoid anything that could threaten their security. It is important to the government to ensure their protection against all threats, to ensure that the state is strong and able to protect the citizen. The tendency of the Lithuanian population to emphasize the value of security indicates an orientation towards conservatism and at the same time a possible closer to change. Our research shows that in recent years, 78 to 84% of Lithuanians have been most concerned about threats that increase human vulnerability. And these threats are fear of losing their job and income during crisis and shocks, fear of illness, lack of social justice, social economic inequality, and ineffective state policies. Research on social economic vulnerability and resilience shed light on how crisis and pandemic undermine human potential and limit options. This research consequently identifies women as a more vulnerable social group at such times. At the individual level, personal resilience is the key to overcoming these challenges. This refers to person's ability to adapt to difficult situations, cope with stress, and maintain a sense of well-being in the face of change. Resilience reflects a person's ability to cope with a stressful situation, to recover from it quickly and effectively, to maintain internal equilibrium, the constructiveness of behavior in adverse circumstances, and the positive psychological ability to recover from difficulties, conflicts, failure, and increased responsibility. Resilience was once considered a rare trait, but it is now recognized, and it is a relatively fluid psychological capacity that all individuals possess and that it can be developed. You see here statistics showing that in times of crisis, the gender pay gap is the most important and largest form in gender inequality. Although the study of Amaru researchers was made in 2014, but when analyzing the newest statistics of this year's Eurostat on gender pay gap, we see that this gap is even bigger now. So the problem haven't changed a bit for the decade, and women become unmotivated to look for work and start to consider and decide whether to devote their energy and time to their careers or to use it successfully in home and look after the family. So as a result of this, societies loses out potential workers whose productivity can be much higher than those of male workers. So our study aims to develop research-based innovative strategies to strengthen women's resilience and reduce gender inequalities. By examining the specific impacts and consequences of threats on women's economic and social well-being, we seek to identify effective approaches for building more resilient individuals and society. The issues we are addressing are also closely related to the so-called midlife crisis. The midlife crisis is becoming one of the most pressing challenges of our time. Research shows that first women and men experience the midlife crisis differently. Women are more emotionally unstable, more likely to lose a sense of purpose in life, and have a greater sense of anxiety about the future. Men are less emotionally unstable, less anxious about the future, and more psychologically comfortable. So, middle-aged women are more vulnerable group than men. It is well known that life consists of periods of stability and periods of change, which alternate. The period of change begins when a person who is relatively satisfied with his life begins to see it in a different light. He begins to realize that he has not used his abilities and that he has not fulfilled his ideas. And when a person realizes that, he needs to change his life, not by changing his environment, but by changing something in himself. He begins to create a new life in the true sense of the word. This is the time when the crisis is felt most sharply. The midlife crisis is one of the most challenging times in a person's life. Changes take place in almost every area of life. Job dissatisfaction builds up, professional demands decreases. Relationship with old friends fall apart and new ones are not made. A person's value systems changes and the need to find meaning in life arises. Since the second period of adulthood lies between the first and old age, when radical changes take place in all levels of human organization, it can be described as the critical period. The age-specific characteristics of late adulthood and the experience of retirement lead to a pre-retirement crisis. In the age group of 40 to 50, professional development is not yet completed, but there is already a great deal of professional experience, individual peaks in work, creative potential, and contribution. The fact that the midlife crisis can often lead to career crisis also reflect in the results of the distribution of men and women by the age peak of their career. When asked at what age they reach the peak of their working life in terms of career and income, 44% of women said it has been the ages of 25 and 35. While the majority of men, 40%, reached the peak of their working life later, between the ages of 36 and 50. After 35 years, only 28% of women has reached the peak of their working life, and after 50 years, only 5 of women, including men, have a working career. So an important conclusion is that our people, especially women, face a midlife crisis after the age of 50 era and are pushed out of the workforce, even though they have experience, knowledge, grown up and independent children who could be of service of their homeland. As life expectancy increases, the world perception of old age changes. According to the World Health Organization, old age begins at 75. So the potential of our mature woman is not being properly utilized. In the light of what have been said, instead of relying on traditional social policy measures, this research proposes a paradigm shift in strengthening women's resilience in the face of shocks by fostering a strong individual capable of pursuing goals, taking responsibility for their lives, and actively participating in shaping them. Also, responding to and adapting to stressful situations and utilizing acquired experience for further development and prosperity. This conceptualization of women's resilience offers an innovative approach to addressing their vulnerability. Women's vulnerability is assessed holistically, considering both life cycle and structural factors. Women are identified as a vulnerable social group experiencing a double impact of crisis. Firstly, middle-aged, 45, 55 years old, and older, 55 to 65 years old. Women with extensive work experience, competence, and expertise are more likely to lose their jobs during crisis and face challenges in finding new employment. Secondly, structural factors highlight women as a more vulnerable group compared to men, with rural and low-income women facing greater vulnerability than urban and affluent women. To enhance the resilience of vulnerable women, this research proposes employing the Euromod microsimulation method in conjunction with innovative and integrated socioeconomic model tools. The proposed understanding of women's resilience as an integral personality with a sense of responsibility for her own life and the development of qualities and skills in the context of socioeconomic and psychological factors is an innovative solution to the problem of women's increased vulnerability, combining the two scientific fields of economics and psychology. Vulnerability is assessed holistically. This means in terms of life cycle and structural factors, focusing on the economic, social, psychological, and coping factors of vulnerable target groups, such as those in middle life crisis and older people. Reducing vulnerability focuses on a new under-research approach, building women's social economic resilience by identifying resilience factors and creating economic conditions and opportunities to overcome life's challenges, reducing inequality between women and men. So, thank you for your attention. I believe that we can do better than the statistics.
Thank you very much. Again, yes, thank you very much for this paper. Very interesting, and maybe we can hear more about the model that you have devised to improve women's resilience. Again, maybe we have one or 2 minutes for questions, or should we all go straight to the final Q&A just for fairness?
Okay.
Yeah? Right. So maybe we take more time at the end of each paper. Do you agree? So fine.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then we move on to the third and final presentation by Yoshiaki Shimizu. Again, apologies for mispronouncing the name. Yoshiaki is a fellow literary scholar like me, I'm very glad, a PhD student at the University of Paris 8, I believe halfway through your PhD probably. He was awarded his bachelor degree by the University of Tokyo before moving to Paris to complete his master's degree in 2021 at the Graduate School of Humanities and Sociology. The floor is yours, the screen rather than the floor.
Okay, so please turn the slide to the next page. Transvestism. Transvestism is the practice of dressing in a manner traditionally or stereotypically associated with a different gender. This term etymologically comes from Magnus Hirschfeld, who coined the word transvestite in his book published in 1910, Die Transvestiten, in order to refer to the sexual interest in cross-dressing. He used to describe persons who habitually and voluntarily clothes of the opposite sex. The term transvestite or transvestism is nowadays considered outdated and derogatory. It has been replaced with the more neutral word crossdresser or crossdressing. The gender mark in crossdressing goes to clothes. But in France, the use of term travesti was already common in the early 19th century to indicate crossdresser. According to the 19th century dictionary, literally, the verb travesti means also to change a serious work into a burlesque one. For example, Scarron wrote Virgile travesti. It is a satiric transformation of Virgile's Aeneid. In French context, this term is not necessarily limited in clothes. The term is a field in which sociological, psychological, and literary meaning cross with each other. I would like to adopt in this presentation a term literary transvestism in order to describe the phenomenon of writer using a name of narrator associated with another sex. Sorry. I would like to adopt in this presentation a term literary transvestism in order to describe the phenomenon of writer using a name or narrator associated with another sex. Research into this practice among male writers, however, remains underexplored, despite extensive studies on female writers' engagement in similar practice. My research aims to fill this gap. Please, next page. Thank you. Previous studies and cases that might be applicable allows us to divide the cases where male authors adopt female masks into following categories. Firstly, the case in which writer creates a fictional female author and presents her work as her own. For example, Théâtre de Couleur Gazelle, published by the author Mérimée under the name of the translator Joseph Lestrange, takes the form of a French translation of plays written by Spanish actress Clara Gazul. When it comes to Renaissance, Mireille Huchon research has attempted to demonstrate the possibility that Louise Ravet, the poetess of Renaissance Lyon, was in fact a fictional poetess created by a group of male poets. Secondly, the practice often seen in magazines and newspapers where the author writes under a signature or a pen name that evokes a woman. Even though it depends on the type and content of the article, the first person is often used. Stefano Mallarmé's case, which will be discussed in this presentation, is in the first person style, using a female pseudonym. Of course, there are various aspects in this case. For example, an article written by Barbé d'Orby in La Style Field was signed Anne de Maublanche but the actual content shows that the narrator is a man. According to Marie-Christine Latta, the case of Arnould Maublanche is the detour of onomastic transvestism. Sadly, in the form of letters, memoirs, and autobiographies, these books are presented as having been written by a certain woman, often published anonymously. In some cases, it is later revealed that the author was actually a man. For example, Letra Portuguesa, considered as a pioneer of the epistolary novel, it was long considered a genuine collection of letters, but is now considered to be created by French Count Durac. As the autobiographical form, Roxana, written by the 18th century Englishman Defoe, was published anonymously and was not identified as Defoe's work until 1775. According to Madeleine Kahn, in early 18th century England, many of the autobiographies purporting to be written by women were in fact written by men. Some authors intended to speak for women, but some others found it suitable to speak through women as a mode of expression. They attempted to be in a new kind of process by adopting these modes and endowing the female voice with a great deal of power. Madeleine Kahn uses the term narrative transvestism to refer to this process, whereby a mere male author gains access to a culturally defined female voice and sensibility, but runs no risk of being trapped in the devalued female realm. Through narrative transvestism, the male author plays out, in the metaphorical body of the text, the ambiguous possibilities of identity and gender. A similar case would be the memoir purporting to be written by a woman. For instance, in the 19th century, Mémoires et souvenirs d'une femme de qualité sur le consulat et l'Empire, actually written by French Baron Lamotte Langon. Please turn to the next page. Thank you. So now let me introduce my study subject, Stéphane Mallarmé. He is a French poet and critic in the second half of 19th century France. He is a so-called symbolist poet, like Baudelaire, Verlaine, and Rimbaud. After the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 and 1871, he got installed in Paris, where he got in touch with Edouard Manet. La Dernière Mode is a fashion magazine edited by Mallarmé in 1874. The publisher was Charles Vendrenne. Apart from poet and short story in each number commissioned from France, almost every word of the text was written by Mallarmé himself under a variety of pseudonyms. The articles and the signatures he used are like following: X for Paris Chronicle, Marguerite de Ponty for the Mode, Miss Satin for the Fashion Gazette, others like Une Dame Créole, Une Lectrice Alsacienne, Zizi, Bon Miracle de Chirac, and Olympe Négresse for Golden Notebook, presenting regional recipes. Except explanations and X articles, all editors are women. X, a male critic talks about theater and books. On the other hand, Marguerite de Ponty supplied dress patterns and advices on education. Miss Satin's article starts from fourth issue, giving news of fashion houses of Paris in publicity style. These three are main editors of this magazine. Mallarmé, please turn to the next page. But Mallarmé was not the only writer in his period to theorize about fashion. Théophile Gautier, for instance, in his essay De la Mode, made an ingenious defense of modern dress. Baudelaire wrote also about fashion in the essay on modernity in his Le Peintre de la vie moderne. Baudelaire considered costume and fashion as one of the signs of spirituality and of longing for ideal. However, Mallarmé's case is different from theirs in the fact that the medium in which his texts are published is the Mode magazine itself. During the Third Republic, after the Franco-Prussian War, the number of fashion magazines increased, diversifying and specializing according to their clientele. At the same time, the number of women's magazines that follow the mode grew as the publishing industry flourished. According to Raymond Gaudriot, there were some 70 women's fashion magazines published in Paris at the end of 1871. 60 of these would disappear towards the end of the century, but 180 magazines were produced between 1871 and 1908. According to the Yearbook of the Publishing Industry, there were 130 magazines in existence in 1898. This situation let us imagine the increased demand for authors to write articles for those magazines. It was female writers who took on this role. According to Octave Usander, La Femme à Paris, the number of female writers engaged in writing articles for magazines and newspapers in France in 1893 was 237, of which at least 230 were responsible only for mode articles in mode magazines or major newspapers. On the other hand, reportage emerged as a new genre in the 1870s, but it was exclusively carried out by men, both because of the energy and mobility required to write this type of articles, and because of its nature of leaping across cultural, national, and social boundaries. According to Marie-Ève Terenti, from the July monarchy to the Belle Epoque, mode magazines and related articles were the most legitimate journalistic tasks for women. Even though male domination remained strong, more women took on mode-related articles than in any other field. In such a society, Mallarmé has had a connection, even though it was indirect, with fashion articles from the beginning of his literary debut. It was in 1862 that Mallarmé's text appeared in a full-fledged literary magazine. It appeared in the January 10th issue of Le Papillon, a literary magazine founded in 1861 by Olympe Odoard, who was a female director and the editor-in-chief, a rarity at the time. From its very first issue, it was a fully-fledged literary magazine with contributions from the most famous writers and poets of the time, including Théophile Gautier, Arsène Housset, and Théodore de Banville. At the same time, the magazine has a mode section written by Olympe Odoard herself. Women are the intended readership. Mallarmé had a long-term interest in jewelry, which is reflected in his dramatic poem Héroïade Scène, written in the 1860s. His correspondence with Villiers de l'Isle-Adam in September 1866 indicates that he intended to publish a gemological theory. At that time, however, it was not intended as a fashion magazine, but as an alchemical book. In 1871, he was appointed to a lycée in Paris, and soon afterwards, he received a commission to review the French stand at the International Exhibition in London, which would be held in 1871 and 1872. On 7 April 1872, he wrote to the Parnassian poet Eldir, saying he had an intention to create a monthly magazine on decorative arts. Okay, please turn to the next page. Leadership will change as a function of the format. The Paris Chronicle includes explanations of such circumstances. X, the narrator of Paris Chronicle, uses the word leader here in both masculine and feminine forms. There are no longer masculine plural leaders, but only feminine plural leaders. He is well aware of the type of reader of this magazine. The Paris Chronicle is exclusively devoted to reviews of theater and literature, and it is written by a male narrator. In contrast, the selection of a female narrator for the Mode column and Fashion Gazette seems to be a strategy based on the leadership of the mode magazines of the time. Please turn to the next page. Thank you. The male narrator's discourse has a strong tendency to try to organize society according to gender. In this discourse, the expression all women discard individuality of each woman and reduce it to a collective feminine stereotype. And please turn to the next page. So, how about when a woman is a narrator? According to Frappier-Major, writing an article in the name of a woman is, after all, a funny satire, and it can be used as a way for men to gain an advantage over women. The cross-dresser is able to mock and transcend the feminine. Certainly, in general way, this argument seems true. However, it is not necessarily applicable to Marguerite de Ponty's case. At the level of the narrator, the register of words is adjusted so that it has a closer relationship to the reader. The first person plural nous expresses this characteristic. Although the word nous itself is not used here, the verb cherchons implies we as the subject of this action. The Quran, written in the manner of a narrator addressing the reader, is close to the epistolary style. According to Christine Plante, at the beginning of the 19th century, On the Epistolary Style and Madame de Sévigné was published as a preface to a collection of letters, and repeated publication made it a source of stereotype, linking the epistolary style and femininity. In this Quran, even though the address is not clear, but the text calls out ladies, which evokes the epistolary form as a whole. Mallarmé used the plural first-person conjugation, cherchons. Despite the epistolary form, the dichotomous relationship of I and you is avoided. According to Evelyn Schullo, the use of the plural first person, nous, in women's magazines means that woman is writing to women. Nous, we, evokes a sense of collective consciousness as we, women. The expression, the needs of womanhood, notre sujet in French, is noteworthy. The reader is objectified as you and at the same time included in us. Here, we functions as a person who bridges the gap between I and you, thereby bringing the narrator and the reader closer together. Okay, please turn to the next page. On the other hand, the fashion gazette column is a distorted reflection of the cross-dresser's awareness of his male identity. This column begins from the fourth issue, whose narrator is named Miss Satin. Unlike the mode column, the name and location of the store are inserted in the text. This was a kind of promotional article. The narrator is chosen to be a different kind of personality as a function of this nature. That means English lady. The frequent use of you in English here emphasizes the sense of distance from the reader. Turn to the next page, please. Thank you. Editorial publicity style is adopted in this column, like Madame Moreau Disbury, 23 Boulevard des Capucines, and Virgile Combe, 24 Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin. This style was contrary to the original philosophy of Mallarmé's magazine. Thus, the British narrator has the dual nature of being both the same sex and the other. Okay, turn to the next page, please. Next page, please. Thank you very much. In this term, the relationship between Fashion Gazette and its reader is similar to that of Paris Chronicle. Furthermore, this column is a self-reflective text that contains meta-discourse. The discourse between the narrator and the reader is enlarged by English words, fashion, and myth. And this intrusive half-page is a kind of meta-discourse. This type of meta-discourse is also seen in Paris Chronicle, where the narrator asks himself whether his criticism is superfluous. And I must persevere and commission me to make a confession, imply an obligation and a passive subject. The narrator of Paris Chronicle and the narrator of Fashion Gazette are superimposed in terms of being an outsider to the solidarity of female readers. The cross-dresser has an advantage over women thanks to his awareness of male identity, says Clapet-Major. In Mallarmé's case, however, certainly he has an advantage because of his male identity, but that advantage is expressed in a distorted way. It would be more appropriate to say that the male superiority is distorted in this literary transvestism. This distortion is expressed as a self-reflexive meta-discourse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And finally, we can have a Q&A session. I'm afraid Monica sent a signal that she had to leave, so she will not be in the discussion. But you know, we can probably bring in her paper in the discussion if we need to. I'm not going to try and connect the two very different papers, each one of them with their own interesting points to make. So we'll start with questions for each individual presenters, Nicolò and Yashoki, and then we'll move on from there. Do you have any question to each other, or do you want me to start?
Well,
sorry, please.
No, sorry.
After you.
Yoshiaki, did you have a question for Nicolò or anything else to add?
Yeah, I have a question to Nicolò. I think it's precisely not the question, but concerning the vulnerability and the thinking of Judith Butler. Yeah. I'm very interested in the thinking of Judith Butler because I'm very interested in transgender questions and queer theories. So please tell me more details about the Butler's. Yeah, Judith Butler thinking about vulnerability, please.
Well, thank you for your interest in my presentation. Well, the thoughts of Judith Butler, I think it's probably a milestone for the gender issues and gender studies because she, as a political philosopher primarily, tries to make the gender, I don't know how to explain in without entering into too much philosophical questions. She wants to highlight the structural issues, gender issues that characterizes Western society. With in particular, I suggest to read her book, Gender Troubles. She tries to highlights the performativity of in the construction of the gender identity. And in this sense, I thought her influence on the gender studies is really crucial to start a discussion and a discourse on vulnerability. In this sense, she, for instance, differentiates vulnerability as I said, into two major dimensions: that of precariousness and that of vulnerability in stricto sensu. Because vulnerability in stricto sensu is something that depends on the context, on the social and political, economic context in which each in which the individual is placed. On the other hand, the precariousness is something more general, more complex, because it deals with the interdependence between individuals. It is a more ontological point of view. And with this regard, the construction of the gender identity depends on the both on the precariousness, both on the general vulnerability in which individuals are placed, but also from the context, on the performativity of the social and political and economic context in which they move, they create relationships. So I suggest you, as I said, to read, for instance, Gender Troubles. It probably it's the most complete.
For the type of work you're doing on literary transvestism, I think the idea of gender as performance, the performativity concept that Butler brought to the fore many years ago, will be very useful for your research. Trying to understand how Mallarmé inhabits other genders, in what ways, and for, performing what kind of gender, something that you're already analyzing, but this would give you a good theoretical angle. Another thing I would suggest in your case is to look at money. Was Mallarmé interested in making money out of this enterprise of inhabiting another gender by writing in fashion magazine? Was there a question of being, being paid for these articles? And therefore there was an audience, there was a very active female readership, there was a magazine that would pay. Was it doing it for money as well? So I think you need to consider a broader biographical context. Why did he decide to, okay, he was interested in jewelry, good. But was he interested in writing under a female pseudonym? Because that meant having a market, therefore reaching more readers, or, supporting himself or whatever. These are questions that I think would be helpful. At least that's my curiosity, why was he, spending so much time writing so much in a fashion magazine at the time? Although it was a good, very interesting experiment, don't get me wrong. I mean, periodical culture at the time was like the internet today, so you needed to participate in this movement. We have a question from
Caterina, sorry. Hi.
Hi, Caterina.
It's very interesting. Thank you, everyone. I was specifically interested for the Mallarmé's presentation because I've never thought of Mallarmé in that specific from that perspective, because he was a Parnassus. He was more. I used to visit his reading aspect in poetry in other dimensions, and I wanted to ask you, how come you got this sense of Mallarmé, because he was more famous for other aspects of his work? How come? This is very impressive. And one thing that I would suggest, perhaps it would be a great idea to perhaps you did it already, to how the perspective of the society in that period of time, as far as I'm concerned, was like women, they only do read romances, they do not care for, let's say, the high literature. So, for example, an emblematic, I think it was the same period, was George Sand, who was a female. He performed the female character in the beginning, and then she switched off by dressing as a man, behaving as a man, and of course writing books by her name. And it's also very impressive how you mentioned in the beginning how males used females' names for their, let's say, overall production, since it was so bad being a woman and publishing texts in general view. How come? Please, it's very interesting.
Thank you, thank you very much for your question. And as for Mallarmé, and firstly, as for my interest, at first I was very impressed by Mallarmé's poetry, just because I like the literature and I like the poetry, and but as I studied Mallarmé, I found La Dernière Mode, fashion magazine written by Mallarmé himself. And firstly, it didn't catch my heart because just because I was interested only the poem of Mallarmé. The fashion magazine is another genre for me. But after finishing my MDiv thesis, after finishing my MDiv thesis and after having some courses in Paris 8 and gender courses Paris 8, I found it interesting to read the fashion magazines written by Mallarmé, reading from a point of view of transvestism, because in Japan, literally transvestism is very well known from ancient age. It is about 1,000 years ago. Male writer used literary transvestism, just like Mallarmé. At that time, Japanese poet Kinosura Yuki wrote Tosa Nikki, journal in Tosa, in first-person style of the subject. The subject was a woman, and in Meiji era and Showa era, maybe you know Dazai Osamu. Dazai Osamu also did literary transvestism in his work Joseto and Shayo. Joseto is schoolgirl, and Shayo is the setting sun. So in Japanese context, literary transvestism is well known as very common way in literary expression. But in French context, literary transvestism was almost forbidden at the time of Mallarmé. But some writers like Mallarmé and like Barbey-D'Aurevilly tried to this type of act. So it catched me, and at the same time, literary transvestism by female writers are well studied, like George Sand and Delphine Girardin, and that's because female writers had a risk when they did literary transvestism, when they write under the pseudonym of male writer, because writing literary works was almost forbidden at the time to women. So now there is many research, but as for male writers, it is not well explored. So I found it good to search it in my doctor courses.
Very interesting.
Yeah. That's because that's why I chose the La Dernière Mode and the literary transvestism as my study. And at the time, in 19th century context, writing under a female pseudonym was almost forbidden to male writers. Even Mallarmé likes to write in this way, because so for example, I said Barbey-D'Aurevilly also used literary transvestism in some genres, but in contrast of Mallarmé, Barbey-D'Aurevilly is a figure of misogyny, and so I read Barbey-D'Aurevilly's articles. Barbey-D'Aurevilly's articles is very interesting, but I found it very satiric. It is very satiric, and yeah.
Okay, that was a very extensive answer. Thank you. I think we're running over time.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you both, and Monica, of course, who is not here anymore, for this panel. I've enjoyed your presentations, all of them, and thank you, Venezia, for hosting the whole thing. The session is over. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Tomorrow the conference will continue, right? Tomorrow morning there is more panels and another keynote.
Yeah. Okay, so see you tomorrow, probably.
With some, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you very much.